There are places in Yellowstone where the earth breathes on its own schedule. Norris Geyser Basin sits in the northwest corner of Yellowstone National Park, straddling the boundary between Wyoming and Montana. It is the hottest and most volatile thermal area in the park. Temperatures beneath the surface reach over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. The basin has no predictable rhythm. Geysers erupt without warning. Fumaroles hiss and fall silent. The ground itself shifts, cracking open new vents and sealing old ones in what geologists describe as perpetual transformation. It is a landscape that has never been still. The basin was named after Philetus Norris, Yellowstone's second superintendent, who explored the region in 1878. Indigenous peoples, including the Crow and Shoshone, avoided the area long before that. Their oral histories speak of the ground as restless, a place where the earth could swallow a man without sound or warning. Early trappers called it the Devil's Kitchen. By the mid-20th century, it had become a site of scientific fascination. The United States Geological Survey established a permanent monitoring station there in 1973 to track seismic activity and thermal output. The data was meant to predict eruptions, to map the supervolcano's heartbeat. For 14 years, the instruments recorded what they were designed to record: fluctuations, anomalies, eruptions that followed no human calendar. The basin remained unpredictable, but measurable. Then, in the summer of 1987, something changed. On the morning of July 14, 1987, a team of 3 geologists arrived at Norris Geyser Basin to replace seismic sensors near Steamboat Geyser. The team consisted of Dr. Margaret Aldridge, a thermal systems researcher from the University of Utah, along with 2 graduate students, Daniel Kovac and Jennifer Ruiz. They planned to spend 4 days at the site, calibrating equipment and collecting soil samples from areas where new thermal activity had been reported the previous month. The work was routine. Aldridge had been conducting field work in Yellowstone for 11 years. Kovac and Ruiz were both in their second year of graduate study. According to their field logs, the first 2 days proceeded without incident. Temperatures were normal. Seismic readings showed the usual low-level tremors associated with geothermal pressure. On the 3rd day, July 16th, at approximately 10:43 in the morning, the first vent opened. It appeared in a section of the basin known as Porcelain Terrace, a chalky expanse of silica deposits where the ground is thin and fragile. The vent was small, roughly 8 inches in diameter, and released a jet of steam that rose 30 feet into the air. Aldridge noted the location and time in her field journal. She expected the vent to either grow or collapse within the hour, as most new thermal features did. 4.7 minutes. Later, a second vent opened. This one was 40 yards to the east, identical in size and steam output. 4.7 minutes after that, a third vent appeared. By noon, 17 vents had opened across Porcelain Terrace, each spaced irregularly but opening in perfect intervals of 4.7 minutes. Aldridge and her team stopped their work and began documenting the phenomenon. Kovac set up a handheld video camera. Ruiz sketched a map of the vent locations. Aldridge radioed the main research station at Old Faithful to report the activity. Then, at exactly 12:11 in the afternoon, all 17 vents stopped releasing steam simultaneously. The silence, according to Aldridge's later account, was immediate and total. No hissing, no residual vapor. The vents remained open, but the earth beneath them had simply stopped exhaling. Aldridge described the moment in a report she submitted to the USGS 3 weeks later. Her language was careful, clinical. She wrote that the cessation of activity was atypical and without precedent in observed geothermal behavior. She noted that the air temperature dropped 2 degrees within minutes of the vents closing. She did not speculate on cause. Kovac, in an informal interview conducted years later, was less restrained. He said the silence felt wrong. He said it reminded him of the moment before a thunderstorm, when the air goes still and animals stop moving. He said he wanted to leave immediately, but Aldridge insisted they continue monitoring the site. For the next 3 days, the vents remained open and inactive. Aldridge's team took soil samples from the edges of each vent. They measured subsurface temperatures and found them consistent with other active areas of the basin. They recorded seismic data and found no unusual tremors. The vents were geologically indistinguishable from any other thermal feature in Norris Basin, except that they had opened in sequence, and now they had stopped. On the evening of July 19th, the vents began releasing steam again. But this time there was no pattern. Some vents hissed intermittently. Others remained silent. 2 of the vents collapsed inward, their openings sealing with hardened silica. Within a week, the thermal activity at Porcelain Terrace returned to what could only be described as normal chaos. Aldridge submitted her findings to the USGS in early August. The report was filed under routine geothermal monitoring. No follow-up study was commissioned. No press release was issued. The video footage Kovac recorded was copied to a VHS tape and archived at the Yellowstone Center for Resources in Mammoth Hot Springs. It remains there, labeled only with a date and a location. 2 months later, both Kovac and Ruiz requested transfers to different research projects. Kovac moved to a glaciology program in Alaska. Ruiz shifted her focus to coastal erosion and left Yellowstone entirely. Neither completed their graduate work on geothermal systems. Aldridge continued working in Yellowstone for another 6 years. She published papers on thermal dynamics and geyser prediction models. She never mentioned the events of July 1987 in any of her published work. In 1993, she accepted a teaching position at a university in Oregon and stopped conducting fieldwork altogether. In 2004, a journalist named Philip Brennan was researching a book on Yellowstone's geothermal history. He came across Aldridge's 1987 report in the USGS archives and contacted her for an interview. She declined. When Brennan pressed, she told him that the incident had been cataloged and reviewed and that there was nothing more to add. She suggested he speak with the park's current geothermal team. Brennan did. The geologists he interviewed were aware of the report, but unfamiliar with the details. One researcher told him that synchronized vent openings were not unheard of in supervolcanic systems, though she could not cite another example. Another said the 4.7-minute interval was likely coincidental, a statistical artifact of natural variation. Brennan eventually abandoned the project. In a blog post written years later, he described the research as unsatisfying. He wrote that everyone he spoke to seemed either uninterested or unwilling to discuss the incident in depth. He noted that Aldridge, Kovac, and Ruiz had all refused follow-up interviews. The video footage remains in the archive. It shows exactly what Aldridge described: 17 vents opening in sequence, each releasing identical columns of steam, each timed 4.7 minutes apart. The final seconds of the recording show the basin falling silent. The camera remains still for another 2 minutes before the footage ends. No similar event has been recorded at Norris Geyser Basin since 1987. But geologists who work there now, particularly those assigned to long-term monitoring stations, have reported something else. It is never included in official documents. It is mentioned only in private conversations, over coffee or at conferences when the formal presentations have ended. They say that sometimes, in the early morning or late evening, when the basin is empty of tourists, the vents go quiet all at once. Not gradually, not one by one. All of them simultaneously, as if the entire system is holding its breath. It lasts only a few seconds. Then the hissing resumes and everything returns to normal. No one has been able to record it. No instruments have captured it. But the geologists who have experienced it say the same thing Kovacs said in 1987. They say it feels like waiting. Sometimes nature moves in ways that make observers question what they know about the world. The Madison River begins in Yellowstone National Park, where the Gibbon and Firehole rivers meet at a place called Madison Junction. From there, it flows northwest through Montana, cutting through the Madison Range before emptying into the Missouri River near Three Forks. The stretch between Ennis and the Bear Trap Canyon is among the most productive trout waters in North America. Rainbow trout, brown trout, and native cutthroat populate the river in numbers that draw fishermen from across the country. The water is cold and clear, fed by snowmelt and underground springs. The current moves at a steady, predictable pace. The Madison has been fished commercially and recreationally since the mid-1800s. Indigenous peoples, including the Shoshone and Bannock, used the river as a seasonal food source for centuries before that. By the late 20th century, the river had become a centerpiece of Montana's fly fishing industry. Guides worked the same runs their fathers had worked. They knew the river's moods, its seasonal fluctuations, the places where fish gathered during high water and low. What happened on June 9, 1993, had no precedent in any record kept by guides, biologists, or the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. The morning began without unusual weather or water conditions. The air temperature was 62 degrees. The river level was normal for early June, slightly elevated from spring runoff, but within seasonal averages. Visibility was excellent. A dozen fishing guides had clients on the water between Ennis and the Varney Bridge, a popular section known for consistent hatches and reliable fish activity. At approximately 11:17 in the morning, a guide named Thomas Callahan noticed something wrong with the river's surface. Callahan had been guiding on the Madison for 19 years. He was rowing a drift boat carrying two clients from Ohio, both experienced fishermen. They were working a stretch near the confluence with Odell Creek, casting dry flies toward a riffle where trout typically fed during mid-morning. According to Callahan's later account, the fish stopped rising. The insects, pale morning duns and caddisflies, continued hatching, but nothing was feeding. Then he saw the first trout moving upstream. It was a brown trout, approximately 18 inches long, swimming steadily against the current. It stayed just below the surface, visible as a dark shadow moving through clear water. Callahan pointed it out to his clients, assuming it was simply changing position. Then he saw another, and another. Within minutes, the entire river was moving. Callahan estimated he could see 30 to 40 fish at any given moment, all swimming upstream in what he described as a coordinated migration. They moved in loose formation, some near the surface, others deeper, but all traveling in the same direction at roughly the same speed. The fish did not jump. They did not break the surface. They made no visible disturbance in the water beyond the displacement of their bodies. Callahan pulled his boat to the bank and watched. His clients did the same. One of them, a man named Robert Finch, took out a small camcorder and began recording. The silence, according to all three men, was immediate and total. The Madison River is not a quiet place. Water moving over rocks creates constant sound, a low rushing that varies in pitch depending on depth and current speed. Birds call from the banks. Insects hum. On a typical June morning, the soundscape is layered and continuous. But as the fish began moving, all of that stopped. Callahan described it as the absence of ambient noise, not a reduction, but a complete withdrawal, as if someone had muted the landscape. He said he could hear his own heartbeat. He said when one of his clients spoke, the voice sounded flat, absorbed by the air before it could carry. Finch, in an interview conducted 2 weeks later, said the silence had a physical quality. He described a pressure in his ears, similar to the sensation of ascending rapidly in an airplane. He said his jaw ached. He said the metallic taste in his mouth reminded him of licking a battery as a child. The fish continued upstream for 47 minutes. Other guides and fishermen along the same 12-mile stretch reported identical observations. A guide named Linda Vasquez, working near Varney Bridge, counted over 200 fish passing her position in the first 10 minutes. A solo fisherman named Gregory Ham, waiting near Reynolds Pass Bridge, described the experience as watching a parade. He said the fish moved with purpose, as if responding to a signal he could not perceive. At approximately 12:04 in the afternoon, the movement stopped. The fish dispersed. Some held in eddies. Others drifted back downstream with the current. Within minutes, trout were rising to insects again. The ambient sound of the river returned gradually, first the water, then the birds, then the insects. Callahan radioed the Ennis Fly Shop and reported what he had witnessed. The shop owner, a man named Peter Harlow, contacted the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Harlow had been operating the shop since 1978 and had never heard of fish behaving in such a manner. By early afternoon, word had spread among the guiding community. At least 9 guides and 14 independent fishermen reported observing the same phenomenon across the affected stretch of river. Most described the silence and the metallic taste. Several mentioned the ear pressure. One fisherman said he felt nauseated during the event and had to sit down on the riverbank until it passed. The Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks dispatched 2 biologists to the Madison River the following morning. Dr. Alan Pritchard and Dr. Sarah Voss arrived with water testing equipment and conducted a survey of the river between Ennis and Varney Bridge. They collected water samples, measured dissolved oxygen levels, tested for pollutants and toxins, and examined several trout caught by local fishermen. Their findings, published in an internal report dated June 18, 1993, indicated no chemical or biological anomalies. Water quality was consistent with historical data. Oxygen levels were normal. Fish tissue samples showed no evidence of disease, parasites, or contamination. The report concluded that the observed behavior was atypical but not indicative of environmental distress. Pritchard, in a follow-up interview conducted by a regional newspaper, suggested the fish may have been responding to seismic activity. He noted that the Madison River sits near an active fault zone and that animals are sometimes sensitive to pressure changes in the Earth's crust. However, the United States Geological Survey reported no seismic events in the region on June 9th or in the days surrounding it. Voss proposed an alternative explanation. She speculated that the fish might have been reacting to a sudden shift in water temperature or chemistry, something brief enough to escape detection in post-event testing. She acknowledged that this theory could not account for the silence or the physical sensations reported by witnesses. Neither biologist could explain the 47-minute duration or the 12-mile extent of the phenomenon. The videotape recorded by Robert Finch was submitted to the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as part of the investigation. The footage shows exactly what witnesses described: fish moving steadily upstream, no surface breaks, no visible disturbance. The audio, however, is more difficult to interpret. Background noise is present at the beginning of the recording: water, wind, human voices. At the 11-minute mark, the audio levels drop noticeably. Finch can be heard speaking, but his voice sounds muffled, as if recorded from inside a closed room. A copy of the tape was sent to a laboratory at Montana State University for analysis. Technicians confirmed that the audio reduction was not a result of equipment malfunction. The recording itself was intact. The ambient sound had simply diminished. No further investigation was conducted. The internal report was filed. The videotape was returned to Finch, who kept it for several years before donating it to a regional historical archive. Pritchard retired from fieldwork in 2001. Voss continued working for the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks until 2009, when she accepted a position with a private environmental consulting firm. Neither has publicly discussed the Madison River incident since the original report was filed. Callahan guided on the Madison for another 16 years. He stopped mentioning the event to clients after the first season. He said people either didn't believe him or became uncomfortable when he described it. In 2012, he sold his guide business and moved to Wyoming. Before leaving, he gave an interview to a local outdoor writer. He said the silence was the part that stayed with him. He said he had fished through storms, floods, and fires, but he had never experienced anything that made the river feel absent. Fishermen still work the Madison River between Ennis and Varney Bridge. The trout population remains strong. Guides recommend the same runs and riffles they always have. The water moves as it has always moved. But there are fishermen, older ones mostly, who were there in 1993, who will sometimes stop mid-cast and listen. They say the river sounds different now. Not all the time, just occasionally. Usually in the late morning, when the light is bright and the mayflies are hatching and everything should feel exactly as it always has. They say it sounds like something is missing. There are lakes that remember how they were born. Earthquake Lake did not exist before August 17, 1959. On that night, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck the Madison River Canyon, approximately 6 miles northwest of West Yellowstone, Montana. The quake triggered a massive landslide. 80 million tons of rock and debris broke loose from the south face of Sheep Mountain and slid into the canyon in less than 30 seconds. The slide buried a Forest Service campground, killed 28 people, and created a natural dam across the Madison River. Within 3 weeks, water had backed up behind the debris, forming what would become known as Earthquake Lake. The lake is approximately 6 miles long and nearly 200 feet deep at its deepest point. It sits at an elevation of 6,400 feet, surrounded by steep canyon walls and dense pine forest. The submerged landscape beneath the water includes the remains of the campground, sections of highway, and entire stands of trees that were flooded when the lake formed. On calm days, the tops of dead trees are still visible above the surface, bleached white by decades of sun and water. The United States Forest Service manages the area as a memorial and geological site. A visitor center near the lake's western edge provides information about the earthquake and the landslide. The lake itself is open to the public for fishing and non-motorized boating, though the water remains cold year-round and the surrounding terrain is steep and difficult to access. It is not a place that attracts large crowds. Most visitors come once, read the plaques, and leave. But there are people, local fishermen mostly, and a few guides who work the Madison River, who return to Earthquake Lake with a frequency that suggests something more than recreational interest. The first documented report of the reversal came in October 1994, 15 years after the lake's formation. A fisherman named Gerald Hooper was working the inlet where the Madison River feeds into the lake's eastern end. He had launched a small inflatable raft just after dawn and was drifting along the shoreline, casting toward submerged timber. At approximately 8:30 in the morning, Hooper noticed that floating debris, pine needles, leaves, bits of bark, had stopped moving downstream. For a moment, everything on the surface of the lake went still. Then the debris began moving in the opposite direction, drifting slowly back toward the inlet. Hooper watched for what he later estimated was 8 to 10 minutes. The debris moved steadily upstream against the natural flow of the river entering the lake. Then, just as abruptly, the movement stopped. The surface went still again. Within a minute, the current resumed its normal downstream direction. Hooper mentioned the incident to the owner of a tackle shop in West Yellowstone. The owner, a man named Vincent Largo, told him it was probably a wind, eddy, or a thermal shift in the water. Hooper said there had been no wind that morning. He said the air had been completely calm. He did not report the incident to the Forest Service or any other official body. He simply filed it away as an oddity and continued fishing the lake. 6 years later, in October 2000, a surveying crew working for the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation was conducting a bathymetric study of Earthquake Lake. The team consisted of 4 members: lead surveyor Rachel Ortega, hydrologist Marcus Delaney, and 2 field technicians, James Lim and Patricia Schultz. They were using sonar equipment mounted on a motorized pontoon boat to map the lake's underwater topography. On the morning of October 12th, the crew was working near the midpoint of the lake when their compasses began behaving erratically. Both handheld compasses and the boat's mounted navigation compass showed bearings that shifted by 10 to 15 degrees over the course of several minutes. Ortega noted the anomaly in the day's field log and assumed it was caused by localized magnetic interference, possibly iron deposits in the submerged landslide debris. At approximately 9:15, Delaney noticed that surface debris near the boat was moving upstream. He pointed it out to Ortega, who stopped the boat's engine to observe. All 4 crew members watched as leaves, small branches, and foam collected near the inlet end of the lake, moving against the current of the Madison River. Ortega timed the phenomenon. It lasted exactly 9 minutes. When the reversal stopped, the compass readings stabilized. The debris resumed its normal downstream drift. Ortega made a second entry in the field log, noting the time and duration. She described the event as hydrologically inconsistent and recommended follow-up investigation. The bathymetric survey was completed 2 days later. The crew submitted their findings, including sonar maps and field logs, to the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. The report included Ortega's observation of the current reversal and the compass anomalies. No follow-up investigation was commissioned. The sonar data was archived. The field logs were filed with other routine survey documentation. Ortega continued working as a surveyor for another 12 years. In 2009, she gave an interview to a graduate student researching anomalous hydrological phenomena in the Rocky Mountain region. She described the Earthquake Lake reversal in detail and expressed frustration that the incident had not been studied further. She noted that all 4 crew members had witnessed the event and that their observations were documented in official records. The graduate student, Emily Forsyth, contacted the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation to request access to the field logs. She was told that the records existed but were part of routine survey data and not available for public review without a formal research application. Forsyth submitted an application. It was denied on the grounds that the data was not relevant to approved research objectives. Forsyth moved on to other projects. The incident appeared briefly in her thesis as a footnote, but received no further academic attention. In October 2010, another surveying crew reported compass anomalies at Earthquake Lake. This team, contracted by a private environmental consulting firm, was conducting a water quality assessment. The crew consisted of 3 people: environmental scientist David Kowalski, field assistant Nina Patel, and a local boat operator named Frank Bergstrom. Kowalski's report, submitted to his employer and later obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, mentioned that compasses behaved unpredictably for approximately 15 minutes on the morning of October 9th. The report also noted that surface water appeared to move contrary to expected flow patterns for a brief period. Kowalski recommended further study of potential magnetic anomalies in the area. His employer did not pursue further investigation. The contract was completed and the report was filed. Bergstrom, the boat operator, mentioned the incident to other guides and fishermen who worked the Madison River corridor. He said the reversal had lasted 9 minutes. He said his compass had spun nearly 40 degrees before settling. He said the surface of the lake had looked wrong, not rough, not disturbed, just wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. One of the people he spoke to was Gerald Hooper, who had witnessed the reversal 16 years earlier. Hooper told Bergstrom he had seen the same thing in 1994. The two men compared their observations. The timing was nearly identical. Both had been on the lake in October. Both had seen the current reverse for approximately 9 minutes. Both had noticed the stillness that preceded and followed the event. Over the next several years, Hooper and Bergstrom began asking other fishermen and guides if they had experienced anything similar at Earthquake Lake. They collected 7 additional accounts, all from people who had been on the water in October, all describing the same phenomenon: a brief reversal of the lake's current lasting between 8 and 10 minutes, accompanied by compass irregularities and an unsettling calm. None of these accounts had been reported to the Forest Service or any scientific body. Most of the witnesses assumed they had misread the water or experienced a localized wind effect. It was only in conversation, years after the fact, that patterns began to emerge. Hooper compiled the accounts into a handwritten document and submitted it to the Hebgen Lake Ranger District Office in 2013. He requested that the Forest Service investigate the phenomenon. The submission was acknowledged with a brief letter thanking him for his interest in the area. No investigation was initiated. Hooper died in 2017. Bergstrom still operates as a guide on the Madison River. He no longer discusses the reversals publicly, but he marks his calendar every October. He says he avoids the lake during the second week of the month. The Forest Service has no official record of current reversals at Earthquake Lake. The Visitor Center makes no mention of compass anomalies or hydrological irregularities. Maps of the area show standard topography and flow patterns. But there are fishermen who have learned to recognize the signs. They say the air goes still first. They say the light changes, not dramatically, just enough to notice. They say if you watch the surface carefully, you can see the exact moment when the water stops obeying the river. They say it always happens in October, and they say it always lasts 9 minutes. Some vehicles pass through places they should no longer exist to enter. The north entrance to Yellowstone National Park sits at the edge of Gardner, Montana, a small town of fewer than 900 permanent residents. The entrance was completed in 1903, marked by the Roosevelt Arch, a massive stone gateway inscribed with the words, "All for the benefit and enjoyment of the people." It is the oldest and most historically significant entrance to the park, used year-round by visitors traveling south from Livingston or north from the park's interior. In 1978, the National Park Service installed automated traffic monitoring cameras at the north entrance as part of a pilot program to track vehicle flow and assess road usage patterns. The cameras were mounted on poles flanking the entrance lanes, angled to capture license plates and vehicle profiles. They were triggered by motion sensors and operated 24 hours a day. Film cartridges were changed weekly by park maintenance staff and sent to a processing facility in Bozeman for development. The system was basic by modern standards: black and white film, fixed focal length, no time-lapse capability. But it was reliable. Each photograph was stamped with a date and time recorded automatically by the camera's internal mechanism. The images were intended for statistical analysis, not security. No one reviewed them for anomalies. They were filed chronologically in archive boxes and stored in a climate-controlled facility at park headquarters in Mammoth Hot Springs. The photographs remained untouched for nearly 3 decades. In 2007, a park historian named Michael Brennan was researching vehicle traffic patterns for a book on Yellowstone's infrastructure. He requested access to the 1978 through 1985 North Entrance photographic records. The archive boxes were retrieved and delivered to his office at Mammoth Hot Springs. Brennan spent 2 weeks reviewing the photographs. Most showed exactly what he expected: sedans, trucks, recreational vehicles, motorcycles entering and exiting the park at various times of day. He made notes on vehicle types and seasonal trends. He was nearly finished with the 1979 collection when he noticed the first anomaly. The photograph was dated March 23, 1979. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. It showed a sedan, a pale-colored, four-door model from the mid-1960s, passing through the entrance heading south into the park. The license plate was clearly visible. Montana registration, sequence reading 7J4321. Brennan flagged the image because traffic at that hour was unusual, particularly in late March when visitation was low. He continued through the archive. 3 weeks later, he found another photograph of the same vehicle, same sedan, same license plate. Timestamp April 16, 1979. 3:17 a.m. He continued searching. Over the next several days, he found 12 more photographs of the vehicle, all taken between 1979 and 1982. Every image showed the same sedan entering the park through the north entrance. Every timestamp read 3:17 in the morning. The dates varied, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months, but the time never changed. Brennan cross-referenced the license plate number with Montana Department of Motor Vehicles records. The plate had been issued in 1964 to a 1963 Chevrolet Bel Air, light blue, registered to a man named Harold Weston of Billings, Montana. According to DMV records, the vehicle had been declared a total loss following a collision in December 1970 and subsequently sold to a salvage yard in Laurel, Montana. The registration had been canceled in January 1971. Brennan contacted the salvage yard. The business had changed ownership twice since the 1970s, but records indicated the Bel Air had been stripped for parts and the frame had been crushed for scrap metal in March 1971. The vehicle in the photographs should not have existed after that date. Brennan compiled his findings into a preliminary report and submitted it to the park's Chief of Resource Management, a woman named Catherine Torres. He included copies of all 14 photographs, the DMV records, and the salvage yard documentation. He requested authorization to investigate further, possibly by contacting Harold Weston or his surviving family members. Torres reviewed the report and scheduled a meeting with Brennan. According to notes Brennan kept from that meeting, Torres acknowledged the photographs were unusual but expressed skepticism about pursuing an investigation. She suggested several explanations. The license plate could have been transferred to another vehicle illegally. The timestamps could be inaccurate due to camera malfunction, or the photographs could have been misfiled from a different location or time period. Brennan countered that the timestamps on all 14 photographs were consistent with other images taken on the same dates, and that the plate transfer theory did not explain why the vehicle always appeared at exactly 3:17 a.m. He also noted that the sedan's body style and condition appeared identical in every photograph, despite the 3-year span. Torres told him she would consider his request. She asked him to leave the photographs and documentation with her for further review. 2 weeks later, Brennan received a memo stating that the investigation would not be authorized. The memo cited budget constraints and the lack of clear relevance to current park operations. Torres suggested that Brennan focus his research on more recent traffic data. Brennan requested the return of the photographs. He was told they had been refiled in the archive. When he went to retrieve them, he found that the original archive boxes had been reorganized. The 14 photographs of the sedan were no longer grouped together. They had been redistributed into their respective chronological positions within the larger collection, mixed in with thousands of other images. Brennan attempted to locate them again, but found the task impractical. Without a comprehensive search of every photograph in the 1979 through 1982 collection, more than 40,000 images, he could not efficiently isolate the anomalous pictures. He made copies of his original notes and documentation, but did not have duplicates of the photographs themselves. He completed his book without including the incident. In the acknowledgments, he thanked Catherine Torres for her assistance with archival research. The book was published in 2009 and received modest attention within park history circles. Torres retired from the National Park Service in 2011. Brennan left his position at Yellowstone in 2013 to accept a teaching position at the University of Wyoming. Before leaving, he donated his research files to the park library, including his notes on the north entrance photographs. In 2016, a park intern named Jessica Morales was cataloging donated research materials when she came across Brennan's file. She read his notes and became interested in the case. She contacted Brennan, who confirmed the details and provided her with copies of the DMV and salvage yard records he had obtained. Morales requested access to the North Entrance Photographic Archive. She spent 6 weeks searching through the 1979 through 1982 boxes. She found 9 of the 14 photographs Brennan had described. The other 5 were either misfiled elsewhere in the archive or no longer present. The 9 photographs she recovered matched Brennan's descriptions exactly. Same sedan, same license plate, timestamps ranging from March 1979 to November 1982, all reading 3:17 a.m. Morales scanned the images and sent copies to Brennan. She also sent them to an automotive historian who specialized in 1960s American vehicles. The historian confirmed the sedan was consistent with a 1963 Chevrolet Bel Air and noted that the vehicle's condition appeared remarkably uniform across all photographs. No visible damage, no changes to bodywork or trim. Morales attempted to locate Harold Weston or his family members. She found an obituary indicating Weston had died in 1994 in Billings. He had no surviving immediate family. Property records showed his home had been sold in 1995. She submitted a brief report to her supervisor requesting permission to write a feature article about the photographs for the park's historical newsletter. The request was denied. Her supervisor told her the story lacked sufficient historical significance and might generate unwanted speculation. Morales completed her internship and left Yellowstone. She kept copies of the photographs and Brennan's notes. She has not published anything about the incident. The 9 photographs remain in the archive at Mammoth Hot Springs, filed among tens of thousands of other images from the late 1970s and early 1980s. The other 5 have not been located. The automated camera system at the north entrance was decommissioned in 1986 and replaced with a digital monitoring system in 2004. No similar anomalies have been reported with the newer equipment, but there are maintenance workers at the north entrance, people who work the early morning shifts, who arrive before dawn to plow snow or repair gates, who say the checkpoint feels different at certain hours. They say the air is heavier around 3 in the morning. They say the lights from passing vehicles sometimes move in ways that don't match the sound of engines. They say if you stand very still near the Roosevelt Arch at that hour, you can hear something that sounds like a car passing through, even when the road is empty. Sometimes the count doesn't match what can be seen. Lamar Valley stretches across the northeastern corner of Yellowstone National Park, a broad glacial valley flanked by the Absaroka Mountains to the east and the Specimen Ridge Formation to the north. The Lamar River runs through its center, carving channels through sagebrush flats and wetlands that support one of North America's densest concentrations of large mammals. Bison graze in herds that number in the hundreds. Elk move through in seasonal migrations. Grizzly bears and black bears forage along the river corridor. The valley has been called the Serengeti of North America. But Lamar Valley is best known for its wolves. Gray wolves were extirpated from Yellowstone by the 1920s, hunted to local extinction as part of federal predator control programs. In 1995, the National Park Service reintroduced 14 wolves from Canada into Lamar Valley as part of a controversial restoration effort. The wolves adapted quickly. They established territories, formed packs, and began reproducing. By 2000, the Lamar Canyon Pack had become one of the most studied wolf populations in the world. Biologists track the wolves using a combination of radiotelemetry and visual observation. Each wolf is fitted with a VHF radio collar that emits a unique frequency. Researchers use handheld receivers and directional antennas to locate individuals within the valley. During winter months, when snow cover makes wolves easier to spot, teams conduct aerial and ground-based population surveys using thermal imaging cameras to supplement visual counts. Thermal imaging detects heat signatures from living animals, displaying them as bright shapes against cooler backgrounds. The technology is particularly effective at dawn and dusk when wolves are most active. Biologists use it to confirm pack size, identify uncollared individuals, and monitor movement patterns across difficult terrain. The first unexplained signature appeared in January 1998. A research team led by Dr. Isabel Raines was conducting a winter survey of the Lamar Canyon Pack from a ridge overlooking the valley's eastern end. The team included 2 wildlife technicians, Aaron Plitt and Denise Kowalczyk, and a volunteer observer named Trevor Booth. They were using a Flyer Systems thermal camera mounted on a tripod, scanning a section of river bottom where the pack had been seen the previous evening. At approximately 7:12 in the morning, Raines counted 9 heat signatures moving through a stand of willows near Soda Butte Creek. 8 of the signatures corresponded to known members of the Lamar Canyon Pack, all wearing radio collars, all transmitting signals that matched their documented frequencies. The 9th signature moved at the same pace and in the same general direction as the rest of the pack, but it had no corresponding radio signal. Raines assumed it was an uncollared wolf, possibly a yearling that had not yet been trapped and fitted with telemetry equipment. She noted the observation in her field log and continued monitoring. Over the next 40 minutes, the pack moved northeast toward Specimen Ridge. The 9th signature remained with them, maintaining consistent distance and behavior. When the wolves reached open ground, Raines switched to visual observation using a spotting scope. She counted 8 wolves. The uncollared individual did not appear. She returned to the thermal camera. 9 signatures were still visible. Raines asked Kowalczyk to verify the count. Kowalczyk confirmed 9 heat signatures on thermal imaging and 8 wolves through the spotting scope. Booth and Splitt conducted their own counts and reached the same conclusion. The team tracked the pack for another 2 hours. The discrepancy persisted. 9 signatures on thermal, 8 animals visible. The 9th signature remained in the same relative position within the pack formation, slightly to the rear, moving at identical speed, never separating or diverging. At 9:36, the pack entered dense timber on the lower slopes of Specimen Ridge. The thermal signatures disappeared into the tree cover. When the wolves emerged into open terrain an hour later, Raines counted 8 signatures. The 9th had vanished. She filed a report with the Yellowstone Wolf Project describing the incident as a possible equipment error or thermal reflection from rocks or vegetation. The report was archived with other routine survey data. The anomaly appeared again 3 weeks later. On February 7, 1998, a different research team working the same area recorded 10 heat signatures while visually confirming 9 wolves in the Druid Peak Pack. The extra signature followed the same pattern, moving at wolf pace, maintaining pack formation, never corresponding to a visible animal. Lead biologist Nathan Vargas documented the discrepancy and tested his thermal camera against known heat sources. The equipment functioned normally. He submitted a technical report requesting a review of the imaging systems used in wolf surveys. The review was conducted in March 1998 by a technician from the thermal camera manufacturer. The equipment was examined, recalibrated, and found to be operating within normal parameters. The technician noted that thermal cameras could occasionally produce false positives from reflected heat or atmospheric conditions, but such anomalies were typically stationary or erratic in movement. A false signature that moved consistently with a wolf pack over extended periods was, in his assessment, highly unlikely. No explanation was provided. The equipment was returned to service. Over the next 6 years, the extra signature appeared in thermal surveys an average of twice per winter season. It was always associated with wolf packs in Lamar Valley, never with other species, never in other areas of the park. Different research teams using different. Cameras reported the same phenomenon. The signature always moved at wolf pace, always maintained pack formation, and never appeared during visual counts. In 2004, Dr. Rains was joined by a graduate student named Marcus Delgado, who proposed a systematic study of the anomaly. Delgado reviewed thermal survey data from 1998 through 2003 and identified 17 instances where heat signature counts exceeded visual counts by 1. He plotted the locations and found that all occurrences clustered in a 3-mile stretch of Lamar Valley between Soda Butte Creek and the base of Specimen Ridge. Delgado requested funding to conduct a controlled experiment using multiple thermal cameras positioned at different angles to triangulate the source of the extra signature. His proposal was reviewed by the Yellowstone Center for Resources and denied. The review committee stated that the anomaly likely resulted from technical artifacts and did not warrant dedicated research resources. Delgado completed his graduate work on other aspects of wolf behavior and left Yellowstone in 2006. His analysis of the thermal discrepancies was never published. Rains continued documenting the anomaly in her personal field notes, but stopped including it in official reports after 2007. In an interview conducted years later, she explained that repeated mentions of unexplained signatures had begun to affect how her work was perceived by colleagues. She said some researchers implied she was misinterpreting data or using faulty equipment. She said it became easier to simply note the discrepancy privately and move on. By 2010, most biologists working in Lamar Valley were aware of the extra signature. It had acquired an informal designation among field staff, the null wolf. Some researchers referenced it in casual conversation. Others avoided mentioning it entirely. No one proposed further investigation. The phenomenon has continued with predictable irregularity. In 2015, a technician named Laura Medina reviewed thermal survey logs from the previous 5 years and found 12 documented instances of the extra signature. In 2019, volunteer observer Raymond Kostick recorded the anomaly during a dawn survey and submitted video footage to the Wolf Project office. The footage clearly showed 9 heat signatures moving across open ground, while simultaneous visual observation confirmed 8 wolves. The video was filed without comment. Current wolf survey protocols include a standardized procedure for handling count discrepancies. If thermal and visual counts do not match, researchers are instructed to recount, check equipment, and note the discrepancy in field logs. No specific explanation is offered for persistent anomalies. The data is archived as recorded. Biologists who have worked in Lamar Valley for extended periods describe the extra signature with a mixture of familiarity and unease. Some treat it as a known quirk of the landscape, something that happens like unusual weather or equipment glitches. Others are less comfortable. They say the signature appears most often in winter, usually in early morning or late evening. They say it favors the same stretch of valley, always near Soda Butte Creek. They say it moves like a wolf, not close enough to be part of the pack, but not far enough to be separate, just there at the edge of the count, keeping pace. None of them can explain why it only shows up on thermal imaging. None of them can explain why it never appears when the sun is high or when the valley is full of tourists. And none of them, when pressed, can say with certainty that they haven't felt something watching from the tree line when the count comes up wrong. There are rivers that forget they are supposed to be warm. The Firehole River flows through the western half of Yellowstone National Park, fed by runoff from the Madison Plateau and heated by dozens of geothermal features along its course. Hot springs, geysers, and thermal vents discharge superheated water directly into the river, raising its temperature to levels unusual for a mountain stream. In summer, sections of the Firehole maintain temperatures between 75 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough for comfortable swimming in a region where most waterways remain frigid year-round. The river has been a recreational destination since the park's establishment in 1872. Early visitors remarked on the novelty of bathing in warm water surrounded by wilderness. By the mid-20th century, designated swimming areas had been established along the Firehole, particularly near the Firehole Canyon Drive and downstream from the Midway Geyser Basin. Park rangers monitored the sites during summer months, and the National Park Service published guidelines warning swimmers about sudden temperature changes near thermal outflows. The Firehole's warmth is not constant. Geothermal discharge fluctuates based on subsurface pressure and seasonal hydrology. Temperature variations of 3 to 5 degrees over the course of a day are common and well documented. These shifts occur gradually and correspond to measurable changes in thermal activity upstream. What happened on July 22, 1964, did not follow that pattern. That afternoon, a family from Idaho, Roger and Patricia Mullen, and their 2 teenage children, were swimming in a section of the Firehole River near the Nez Perce picnic area. The Mullins had visited Yellowstone several times before and were familiar with the river's characteristics. They entered the water around 2:15 in the afternoon. According to Patricia Mullen's later account, the temperature was comfortably warm, consistent with previous visits. At approximately 2:40, Roger Mullen noticed the water felt cooler. He assumed they had drifted closer to a cold water tributary, but the temperature continued to drop. Within minutes, the warmth had disappeared entirely. Patricia Mullen described the sensation as stepping from a heated pool into an ice bath. The family exited the water. Roger Mullen checked a thermometer he kept in their vehicle, a habit developed from years of camping. The air temperature was 78 degrees. He waded back into the river and submerged the thermometer. The water temperature read 62 degrees. 30 minutes earlier, he estimated it had been near 80. The Mullins waited on the riverbank, uncertain whether to report the incident. After 20 minutes, Roger Mullen tested the water again. The temperature had returned to 79 degrees. The shift had reversed as abruptly as it had occurred. The family mentioned the incident to a park ranger at the Madison Junction Ranger Station later that day. The ranger, whose name was not recorded, noted the report but did not initiate an investigation. Temperature fluctuations in the Firehole were considered routine. The Mullins left Yellowstone the following morning. Patricia Mullen later told a family friend that the coldness of the water had been unsettling, but what disturbed her more was the silence. She said the birds had stopped calling. She said the forest on both sides of the river had felt too still, as if something were waiting just beyond the tree line. She did not mention this to the ranger. The next documented temperature drop occurred on August 9, 1971. A group of college students from Montana State University were spending a weekend in the park. 3 of them, James Kowalski, Andrea Farley, and Daniel Roth, decided to swim in the Firehole near Ojo Caliente Spring. They entered the water at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. According to Kowalski's account, given years later in an informal interview, the water was warm when they started swimming. 15 minutes in, Farley commented that it felt colder. Kowalski initially dismissed the observation, but within 5 minutes, the temperature had dropped noticeably. All 3 left the water. Roth, a geology student, had been taking water samples earlier in the day for a class project. He retrieved his field kit and measured the river temperature, 61 degrees Fahrenheit. He checked his earlier notes. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, he had recorded a temperature of 78 degrees in nearly the same location. The students discussed whether a nearby geyser might have stopped erupting, cutting off a thermal source. But Ojo Caliente Spring, the nearest feature, showed no change in activity. Steam continued rising from its vent. The surrounding ground remained hot. Kowalski said they waited by the river for about half an hour. Farley wanted to leave. She told the others she felt like they were being observed. Roth measured the temperature again. It had climbed back to 76 degrees. None of them reported the incident to park authorities. Kowalski said it seemed too strange to explain, and he wasn't sure anyone would believe them. Over the following decades, 5 more incidents were documented by swimmers and visitors. Each followed the same pattern, a sudden temperature drop of approximately 18 degrees, occurring over a span of 20 to 30 minutes, followed by an equally rapid return to baseline warmth. The incidents occurred in different sections of the Firehole River, separated by miles, but all within the thermally active corridor between Madison Junction and Old Faithful. In 1983, a park employee named Leslie Tran was wading in the river near the Firehole Falls when the temperature dropped. She filed an official report with her supervisor describing the event and noting that the air temperature and visible thermal activity had remained constant. The report was acknowledged but not investigated. In 1992, a family from Oregon experienced the shift while swimming near the Firehole Canyon Drive. The father, Kenneth Hayward, was a mechanical engineer with training in thermodynamics. He later wrote a letter to the Yellowstone Center for Resources describing the incident and requesting information about geothermal fluctuation patterns. He received a reply thanking him for his interest and stating that the firehole's thermal characteristics were complex and not fully understood. The most recent documented incident occurred in July 2009. A group of hikers, including a graduate student named Rebecca Salazar, were resting near the river between the Midway and Lower Geyser basins. Salazar had brought a digital thermometer to monitor ambient conditions for a research project on microbial mats in thermal runoff channels. She recorded the river temperature at intervals throughout the afternoon. At 5:18, her thermometer read 77 degrees. At 5:34, it read 59 degrees. At 6:07, it read 78 degrees. Salazar submitted her data to her faculty advisor at the University of Wyoming. The advisor, Dr. Martin Ostergaard, contacted the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory to inquire whether seismic or geothermal monitoring systems had detected unusual activity on that date. The observatory reported normal conditions. Ostergaard suggested Salazar's equipment might have malfunctioned, though her other measurements from the same day showed no anomalies. No formal study of the temperature shifts has been conducted. The incidents are scattered across decades, reported by unrelated parties, and lack the repetition or frequency that would typically warrant scientific investigation. The National Park Service has no protocol for monitoring anomalous thermal events in the Firehole River beyond routine geothermal survey work. But the reports share commonalities beyond the temperature data. Nearly every witness described a sense of being watched. Some mentioned the silence, birds and insects falling quiet during the cold period. Others noted a change in the quality of light, though none could articulate what had changed. Several witnesses said they felt compelled to leave the area quickly, even after the water warmed again. Patricia Mullen, in a letter written to her sister in 1965, said the forest had felt occupied during the incident. She said she kept expecting to see someone standing among the trees, though she never did. Andrea Farley, interviewed decades after the 1971 event, said the sensation of being observed had been so strong that she refused to return to Yellowstone for 15 years. Rebecca Salazar noted in her field journal that the forest had seemed darker during the temperature drop, though her photographs from the same period showed no change in light levels. The Firehole River continues to flow warm through Yellowstone's thermal basins. Swimmers still use the designated areas during summer months. Geothermal features discharge into the water at predictable rates. Temperature fluctuations are expected and routine. But there are rangers and long-term employees who know the stories. They don't mention them to visitors. They don't include them in educational programs or printed materials. But they know, and some of them, when asked privately, will admit they avoid certain sections of the Firehole in late afternoon. They'll say the light sits differently there. They'll say the trees grow too close to the water. They'll say that sometimes, when the river goes cold, it's better not to ask why. There are towns where communication stops on schedule. Cook City sits at the northeastern edge of Yellowstone National Park, barely inside the Montana border. The town occupies a narrow valley at 7,600 feet elevation, hemmed in by the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness to the north and the park boundary to the south. In winter, when the Beartooth Highway closes under snow, Cook City becomes accessible only through Yellowstone, a 60-mile drive from Gardner through Lamar Valley. The permanent population hovers around 75 residents. Most work in tourism, operating lodges, restaurants, and snowmobile rental businesses. The town was established in 1882 as a mining camp. Gold and silver brought prospectors into the mountains, though the deposits proved modest and the mines were largely abandoned by the 1920s. What remained was a collection of wooden buildings, a post office, and a community sustained by its proximity to Yellowstone and the wilderness beyond. The Beartooth Mountains loom to the northeast, their granite peaks visible from every window in town. Radio communication has always been unreliable in Cook City. The terrain blocks signals. The elevation creates atmospheric interference. CB radios, which became popular among residents and snowmobilers in the 1970s, worked inconsistently. Commercial radio stations from Billings or Bozeman faded in and out. Cell phone service would not reach the area until the early 2000s, and even then it remained spotty. But what began happening in November 1985 was different from ordinary interference. On the evening of November 14, 1985, at approximately 5:22 p.m., just after sunset, every radio in Cook City stopped working simultaneously. CB radios went silent. AM and FM receivers produced only static. A Forest Service ranger stationed at the nearby Cook City Ranger District office, a man named Thomas Galloway, was midway through a radio check with the district office in Gardner when the transmission cut out. He adjusted the frequency, checked the equipment, and attempted to re-establish contact. Nothing worked. Galloway walked to the general store to see if others were experiencing similar issues. The store owner, Margaret Bishop, confirmed that her CB radio had also gone silent at the same time. So had the radio at the Soda Butte Lodge. A snowmobile tour operator named Dennis Kovarik said his handheld CB had been working fine until a few minutes earlier, then simply stopped receiving or transmitting. The blackout lasted 4 hours. At 9:22 p.m., the radios resumed functioning as abruptly as they had stopped. Galloway completed his delayed radio check with Gardner. Bishop's CB picked up a trucker's conversation on Highway 90. Kovarik's handheld started working again mid-sentence, as if no interruption had occurred. Galloway filed a report with the Forest Service, describing the incident as a localized communications failure of unknown origin. He noted the precise timing and the fact that all radio equipment in town had been affected simultaneously. The report was forwarded to the regional office in Missoula. No explanation was provided. The blackout happened again the following November, on November 9, 1986, at 5:18 p.m., again just after sunset. All radio communications in Cook City ceased. The duration was identical, 4 hours. Residents who had experienced the previous year's blackout recognized the pattern immediately. Those who hadn't were confused and concerned. This time, more people noticed the hum. Margaret Bishop described it as a low vibration, felt more than heard, like standing near heavy machinery. She said it seemed to come from the north, from the direction of the Beartooth Range. Dennis Kovarik said the hum made his teeth ache. A seasonal worker named Laura Simmons, who was staying at the Soda Beauty Lodge, said the sound reminded her of electrical transformers under load, though there were no transformers in that part of town. Thomas Galloway noted the hum in his second report to the Forest Service. He described it as subsonic or near subsonic, persistent throughout the 4-hour blackout, and ceasing when radio communications resumed. He requested that seismic monitoring equipment be installed in the area to determine if the phenomenon was related to underground activity. The request was denied due to budget constraints. The blackouts continued every November for the next 11 years. The timing varied slightly, always occurring within 30 minutes of sunset, but the duration remained constant at 4 hours. By 1990, most residents of Cook City had experienced multiple blackouts. Some began to anticipate them, noting the date and preparing accordingly. In 1991, a journalist named Richard Padilla, working for a regional newspaper in Billings, heard about the phenomenon and traveled to Cook City to investigate. He arrived in early November and interviewed residents about their experiences. Bishop, Kovarik, and several others described the blackouts in detail. Galloway provided copies of his reports to the Forest Service, which Padilla reviewed. Padilla also spoke with a retired electrical engineer named Walter Hendricks, who had moved to Cook City in 1988. Hendricks had experienced 3 blackouts and had attempted to document them using a portable oscilloscope and frequency analyzer. He detected the low-frequency hum during the blackout on November 12, 1990. According to his measurements, the hum registered at approximately 35 hertz, below the threshold of normal human hearing, but detectable by sensitive equipment and sometimes perceptible as vibration. Hendricks told Padilla he had reviewed geological surveys of the Beartooth Range and found no active seismic sources that would produce such a frequency. He had also contacted the National Weather Service to inquire about atmospheric phenomena that might generate low-frequency sound. The meteorologist he spoke with suggested the hum could be caused by temperature inversions or wind patterns interacting with mountain topography, but could not explain why it would occur with such regularity or why it would coincide with radio failures. Padilla's article was published in December 1991. It included interviews, Hendricks' frequency data, and Galloway's Forest Service reports. The article generated brief regional interest but no official investigation. A few readers wrote letters suggesting explanations, ranging from military testing to natural electromagnetic phenomena. None could account for the precise timing or the consistent 4-hour duration. The blackouts continued through November 1997. Then they stopped. November 1998 passed without incident. So did November 1999. Residents waited, uncertain whether the phenomenon had ended or simply paused. Some, like Margaret Bishop, expressed relief. Others, including Dennis Kovarik, described the absence as unsettling, as if something that had been present for years had simply withdrawn without explanation. Thomas Galloway retired from the Forest Service in 2001. Before leaving, he compiled a summary of all his reports related to the Cook City blackouts and submitted it to the regional office with a request that the data be preserved for future analysis. The summary documented 13 separate incidents between 1985 and 1997, each occurring in November, each lasting 4 hours, each beginning near sunset. The summary was filed in the regional archives. No analysis was conducted. Walter Hendricks continued monitoring for the hum using his equipment through 2005. He detected no recurrence of the 35 Hz frequency. He moved to Arizona in 2007 and took his equipment with him. Richard Padilla followed up on his original article in 2003, traveling to Cook City to ask residents if the blackouts had resumed. They had not. He wrote a brief update for the newspaper noting the phenomenon's apparent cessation and the lack of explanation for either its occurrence or its end. The update was published as a small column and attracted little attention. Margaret Bishop still lives in Cook City. In an interview conducted in 2018, she said the blackouts had been the strangest thing she had experienced in 40 years of living in the mountains. She said what bothered her most was not the loss of radio communication — people in Cook City were used to isolation — but the regularity. She said it felt deliberate, as if something were testing the town or marking time in a way that had nothing to do with human schedules. Dennis Kovarik, now retired from the snowmobile business, said he remembered the hum more clearly than the radio silence. He said it had felt like pressure inside his skull, like the air itself was vibrating. He said when it stopped in 1998, he noticed the absence immediately, the way you notice when a refrigerator stops running and the house becomes quieter than you realized it could be. The Forest Service has no current protocol for investigating unexplained communication failures in remote areas. The reports filed by Thomas Galloway remain in the archives, accessible to researchers but not actively studied. The phenomenon is not mentioned in any official history of Cook City or the surrounding wilderness. But there are people, mostly older residents, people who were there during the years when November meant silence, who still listen carefully as sunset approaches each year. They say the hum never felt random. They say it felt like it came from something specific, something located in the mountains to the north. And they say that even though it's been gone for more than 20 years, they sometimes wonder if it's still there, just quieter now, waiting for a reason to return. Some voices speak from places where no one is standing. Mammoth Hot Springs sits at the northern edge of Yellowstone National Park, 5 miles south of the town of Gardner, Montana. The terraces are among the park's most distinctive geothermal features, cascading formations of travertine built by calcium carbonate deposited from hot spring water as it cools and flows downslope. The terraces change constantly. New springs open, old formations dry and crumble. Colors shift from white to orange to brown as thermophilic bacteria colonize different temperature zones. The area has been inhabited for thousands of years. Indigenous peoples, including the Crow, Shoshone, and Bannock, use the hot springs for spiritual and practical purposes. The Crow called the thermal features the place of hot water, Woy, and considered certain terraces sacred. Early Euro-American explorers documented the springs in the 1860s. By 1872, when Yellowstone became the world's first national park, Mammoth Hot Springs was already a tourist destination. Fort Yellowstone was established at Mammoth in 1886, serving as park headquarters and housing for the United States Army, which managed Yellowstone until the National Park Service was created in 1916. Many of the original fort buildings still stand, now serving as administrative offices and employee housing. The terraces remain one of the park's most visited sites, accessible via boardwalks that wind through the formations. Park rangers stationed at Mammoth conduct daily interpretive programs explaining the geology and history of the terraces to visitors. The work is routine, repetitive, and carefully scripted. In August 2003, a seasonal park ranger named David Calloway was assigned to record audio files for a new self-guided tour system being developed for Mammoth Hot Springs. The system was intended to provide automated information at various points along the boardwalk, allowing visitors to learn about specific features at their own pace. Calloway's job was to visit each designated stop, record a 3 to 5 minute narration about the geology and history of that location, and submit the files to the park's education department for editing. Calloway had worked at Yellowstone for 2 summers. He was 24 years old, a recent graduate in environmental studies from the University of Montana. His supervisor described him as reliable and detail-oriented. He had no history of filing unusual reports or making unsubstantiated claims. On the afternoon of August 7, 2003, Calloway hiked to the Upper Terrace area of Mammoth Hot Springs to record information about a formation called Orange Spring Mound. The area was quiet. Most visitors concentrated on the lower terraces closer to the parking area. Calloway arrived at approximately 3:30 p.m. He set up his portable digital recorder, a Sony model commonly used for field recordings, and checked the audio levels. According to his later account, he was alone. The nearest visitors were at least 200 yards away, visible on the lower boardwalk. The weather was clear. There was minimal wind. Calloway began recording. He spoke for approximately 4 minutes, describing the formation structure, the process of travertine deposition, and the historical significance of the upper terraces. He concluded the narration, stopped the recording, and played it back to check the quality. The voice appeared at the 2-minute 17-second mark. It was distinct from Calloway's narration, a different voice, male, speaking words Calloway did not recognize. The voice was clear and audible, lasting 11 seconds, then stopping abruptly. Calloway's narration continued uninterrupted, as if the other voice had simply inserted itself into the recording without affecting the surrounding audio. Calloway played the section multiple times. The voice remained consistent. He checked his equipment for malfunction. The recorder showed no errors. He walked the area, looking for any source that might have bled into the recording. Radios, other visitors, electronic devices. He found nothing. He saved the file and returned to the ranger station at Mammoth. He did not mention the anomaly to his supervisor. He submitted the other recordings he had made that day, but kept the Orange Spring Mound file on his personal device. Over the next several days, Calloway played the recording for a few trusted colleagues. Most suggested technical interference or crosstalk from a radio frequency. One ranger, a woman named Patricia Volkov, noted that the voice sounded deliberate, as if speaking a coherent phrase, not random noise or fragmented transmission. Calloway researched audio anomalies, searching for similar incidents in park records. He found nothing relevant. He contacted a friend who worked in audio engineering and sent him the file. The engineer confirmed that the voice was embedded in the recording's waveform, not a result of playback error or post-recording corruption. The engineer could not explain how a second voice could appear in a digital recording made in an isolated location with no nearby audio sources. Calloway kept the file but did not pursue further investigation. He completed his seasonal contract in September 2003 and left Yellowstone. He took the recording with him. For 6 years, the file remained on Calloway's personal computer. He occasionally played it for friends or mentioned it in conversations about unusual experiences, but he never submitted it to the National Park Service or any academic institution. He said later that he feared being dismissed or ridiculed. In 2009, Calloway was contacted by a linguist named Dr. Elena Vasquez, who was conducting research on indigenous languages of the greater Yellowstone region. A mutual acquaintance had mentioned Calloway's recording, and Vasquez expressed interest in hearing it. Calloway sent her a copy of the file. Vasquez analyzed the 11-second segment. She consulted with colleagues specializing in Siouan languages, the family to which the Crow language belongs. After several weeks of analysis, Vasquez concluded that the voice was speaking in what appeared to be an archaic dialect of Crow, a form of the language that had not been actively spoken since the late 19th century. The phrase, according to Vasquez's translation, was fragmentary, but appeared to reference water and passage, or movement. The exact meaning was uncertain due to the dialect's age and the brevity of the recording, but Vasquez noted that the syntax and phonology were consistent with historical Crow linguistic patterns documented by early anthropologists. Vasquez asked Callaway for permission to publish her findings. He declined. He said he did not want his name associated with the incident and preferred to keep the matter private. Vasquez respected his wishes but kept her analysis in her personal research files. In 2010, Callaway submitted the recording anonymously to the Yellowstone Center for Resources, the park's Research and Archives Division. He included a brief written description of when and where the recording was made, but provided no personal identifying information. The file was received and cataloged, but generated no formal response. A staff member at the Center for Resources, a historian named Gregory Ham, reviewed the submission and forwarded it to the park's Cultural Resources Department. The department acknowledged receipt, but did not initiate an investigation. The file was archived as an unexplained audio anomaly, categorized with other unusual submissions the park received periodically, stories of strange lights, odd sounds, or inexplicable events. In 2012, Dr. Vasquez attempted to access the recording through official channels, requesting a copy from the Yellowstone Center for Resources for academic research purposes. She was told that while the file existed in the archive, it could not be released without the original submitter's consent, and the submitter's identity was not on record. Vasquez's request was denied. She continued her research on Crow linguistic history, but did not publish her analysis of the mammoth recording. In a conference presentation in 2014, she briefly mentioned the existence of an unverified audio recording containing what appeared to be archaic Crow speech, but she provided no details about its origin or content. The mention generated little interest among attendees. Callaway has not returned to Yellowstone. He works as an environmental consultant in Missoula and has not spoken publicly about the recording since providing it to Vasquez. In a brief email exchange in 2016, he confirmed that he still had the original file and that he occasionally listened to it, though he could not explain what he was hearing or why it was there. Patricia Volkov, the ranger who first listened to the recording with Callaway in 2003, retired from the National Park Service in 2018. In a casual conversation with a colleague shortly before her retirement, she mentioned the incident. She said what had stayed with her was not the presence of the voice. Unexplained audio could have many causes, but its clarity. She said it sounded like someone standing close to the recorder, speaking directly into it, at a moment when no one was there. The recording remains in the Yellowstone Center for Resources archive. It is accessible only to park staff and authorized researchers. It has not been analyzed by additional linguists or audio specialists. No similar recordings have been submitted to the park since 2010. But there are rangers who work the upper terraces at Mammoth, who walk the boardwalks early in the morning or late in the afternoon when the tourists have gone, who sometimes stop near Orange Spring Mound and listen to the silence. They say the terraces are never truly quiet. There is always the sound of water moving beneath the travertine, the hiss of steam, the wind moving through the sage. But sometimes, they say, there is something else, not loud, not clear, just present, like a voice speaking from a place that exists slightly adjacent to where they are standing. And when they hear it, they keep walking. There are places in the sky where instruments forget how to read the earth. Paradise Valley stretches 50 miles along the Yellowstone River between Livingston and Gardner, Montana. The valley runs north to south, bordered by the Absaroka Range to the east and the Gallatin Range to the west. Both mountain chains rise above 10,000 feet, creating a natural corridor that funnels weather systems and concentrates atmospheric pressure. The valley floor sits at approximately 5,500 feet elevation, covered in ranchland, cottonwood groves, and scattered residential properties. The area has been inhabited for thousands of years. Indigenous peoples, including the Crow and Shoshone, used the valley as a travel route, between the Yellowstone Plateau and the plains to the north. Euro-American settlement began in the 1870s, driven by ranching and proximity to Yellowstone National Park. By the mid-20th century, Paradise Valley had become a destination for artists, writers, and outdoor recreationalists drawn to its combination of wilderness access and pastoral landscape. The valley is popular with private pilots. The Yellowstone River provides a visual navigation reference. The terrain allows for emergency landings in open fields. Weather conditions, while variable, are generally predictable. Small aircraft frequently transit the valley en route to destinations in Idaho, Wyoming, or western Montana. Flight through Paradise Valley is routine until it isn't. On the afternoon of June 4, 1996, a private pilot named Kenneth Hargrove was flying a Cessna 172 from Bozeman to a private airstrip near Cook City. Hargrove was an experienced pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight time, including extensive mountain flying. The weather was clear. Visibility exceeded 20 miles. Hargrove was flying at 8,500 feet, well above the valley floor, following the Yellowstone River south. At approximately 2:47 p.m., while passing over a section of the valley near the town of Emigrant, Hargrove's instruments failed. The altimeter dropped to 0. The airspeed indicator fell to 0. The magnetic compass began spinning slowly, completing one full rotation over approximately 10 seconds before stopping at a heading that did not correspond to the aircraft's actual direction of travel. The GPS unit, a portable model mounted on the instrument panel, displayed a position error and shut down. The failure lasted 18 seconds. Then, simultaneously, all instruments reset and resumed normal operation. The altimeter read 8,500 feet. The airspeed indicator showed 90 knots. The compass stabilized on the correct heading. The GPS unit rebooted and reacquired satellite signals. Hargrove immediately checked his engine instruments. Oil pressure, fuel flow, and engine temperature all appeared normal. The aircraft was flying normally. There was no turbulence, no unusual sound, no indication of mechanical failure. But Hargrove felt something he later described as an overwhelming compulsion to descend. He said the urge had no rational basis. There was no reason to lose altitude, no emergency, no malfunction. But the feeling was so strong that he reduced power and began a gradual descent before consciously deciding to do so. He caught himself at 7,800 feet and leveled off. Hargrove continued to Cook City without further incident. After landing, he inspected the aircraft and found no mechanical issues. He mentioned the instrument failure to the airstrip operator, a man named Douglas Pemberton, who suggested the problem might have been caused by electromagnetic interference or a temporary electrical fault. Hargrove filed a NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System report describing the incident. The report was processed and archived. No investigation was initiated. 3 years later, on August 22, 1999, a pilot named Sandra Navarro experienced an identical failure while flying a Piper Cherokee through Paradise Valley. Navarro was en route from Livingston to West Yellowstone. She was flying at 9,000 feet when her instruments failed simultaneously. Altimeter, airspeed, compass, and GPS all dropped to 0 or became erratic. The failure lasted approximately 20 seconds before all systems reset. Navarro also reported feeling a strong urge to descend during the instrument failure. She described it as an instinctive response, as if her body were reacting to information her conscious mind could not perceive. She resisted the urge and maintained altitude. After landing at West Yellowstone, Navarro contacted the Federal Aviation Administration to report the incident. An FAA inspector examined her aircraft and found no mechanical or electrical faults. Navarro's instruments were tested and functioned normally. The inspector noted that electromagnetic interference from nearby radio towers or power lines could occasionally affect aircraft electronics, though such interference typically did not cause simultaneous failure of independent systems. Navarro asked if other pilots had reported similar experiences in Paradise Valley. The inspector said he was not aware of any, but suggested she check with local pilots or the Montana Pilots Association. Navarro contacted the association and was eventually referred to Kenneth Hargrove, who had filed the 1996 report. The two pilots compared their experiences. The instrument failures had occurred over the same general area, a section of Paradise Valley approximately 5 miles south of Emigrant. Both had experienced the failures at different altitudes. Both had felt the compulsion to descend. Hargrove and Navarro attempted to determine the exact coordinates where the failures had occurred. Using GPS logs and memory, they estimated a location near latitude 45.3, 5 north de Douai, longitude 110.71 west, an area of open ranchland along the eastern side of the valley, with no visible structures or installations that might generate electromagnetic interference. In September 1999, Hargrove flew over the area again, deliberately passing through the coordinates where his instruments had failed 3 years earlier. This time, nothing happened. His instruments functioned normally. He made 2 additional passes at different altitudes. No anomalies occurred. Navarro made a similar flight in October. Her instruments also functioned normally. The third incident occurred on July 9, 2004. A pilot named Marcus Delaney was flying a Beechcraft Bonanza from Bozeman to Jackson, Wyoming. Delaney was a commercial pilot with over 5,000 hours of experience, including time as a flight instructor and charter pilot. He was familiar with Paradise Valley and had flown the route dozens of times. At approximately 11:23 a.m., while flying at 10,000 feet near Emigrant, Delaney's instruments failed. Altimeter to 0, airspeed to 0, compass erratic, GPS offline. The failure lasted 16 seconds. Delaney also felt the compulsion to descend. He later described it as physically uncomfortable, like a pressure in his chest that would only be relieved by losing altitude. He maintained his heading and altitude through conscious effort, waiting for the instruments to reset. When they did, he continued to Jackson without further incident. After landing, he contacted the FAA and filed a report. He also contacted the Montana Pilots Association, asking if similar incidents had been reported. He was referred to Sandra Navarro. Navarro put Delaney in touch with Hargrove. The 3 pilots shared their experiences and found the pattern. Same location, same simultaneous instrument failure, same compulsion to descend. All 3 were experienced pilots. All 3 had been flying different aircraft types with different avionics. All 3 had encountered the phenomenon on clear days with good visibility. Hargrove proposed a coordinated investigation. He suggested that pilots equip their aircraft with additional recording devices, cameras, secondary GPS units, magnetic field detectors, and deliberately fly through the coordinates to document any anomalies. Navarro and Delaney agreed. Over the next year, the 3 pilots made multiple flights through the area. None of them experienced instrument failures. Their recording equipment detected no anomalies. Ground-based testing using magnetometers and electromagnetic field detectors found no unusual readings at the suspected location. In 2006, Hargrove contacted a geophysicist at Montana State University, Dr. Alan Pritchard, and described the incidents. Pritchard reviewed the pilots' reports and suggested several possible explanations. Localized magnetic anomalies caused by subsurface mineral deposits, atmospheric ionization from solar, activity or temperature inversions creating unusual electromagnetic conditions. However, Pritchard noted that none of these phenomena would typically cause the specific pattern described, simultaneous failure of independent systems followed by immediate recovery. Pritchard offered to conduct a site survey, but noted that without consistent, repeatable data, it would be difficult to identify a specific cause. The pilots provided him with their GPS coordinates and flight logs. Pritchard visited the area in August 2006 and conducted magnetic and electromagnetic surveys. He found no anomalies. His informal report, shared with the pilots but never published, concluded that the instrument failures were likely coincidental and caused by unrelated technical issues in each aircraft. He acknowledged that the geographic correlation was unusual, but suggested it might be the result of confirmation bias, pilots remembering the location because of the unusual nature of the failures. Hargrove, Navarro, and Delaney disagreed with this assessment but had no additional evidence to support their position. They continued to avoid flying directly over the coordinates when transiting Paradise Valley, deviating slightly east or west when passing through the area. Word of the incident spread informally among Montana's general aviation community. Some pilots dismissed the reports as exaggeration or equipment malfunction. Others began noting the coordinates and adjusting their flight paths accordingly. The phenomenon acquired an unofficial designation, the Paradise Valley Convergence Point. No additional instrument failures have been reported in official channels since 2004. But there are pilots, those who fly regularly through the valley, who know the terrain and the weather patterns, who say they still feel something when passing over that section of the valley. They say the air feels different, heavier. They say their hands tighten on the controls without conscious thought. They say they watch their altimeters more closely, even though the needles never move. And they say that when they fly over Emigrant on clear afternoons, when the valley is visible for miles in every direction, they sometimes glance down at the empty ranch land below and wonder what would have happened if they had descended, if they had followed the urge that had no name and no reason, if they had let the instruments pull them down toward something waiting in the grass. There are natural rhythms that follow no natural law. Tower Falls is located in the northeastern section of Yellowstone National Park, approximately 18 miles south of the park's northeast entrance at Tower Junction. The waterfall drops 132 feet from the edge of a volcanic outcrop into Tower Creek, which flows north to join the Yellowstone River near the historic Roosevelt Lodge. The falls are named for the tower-like volcanic pinnacles that flank the cascade, eroded columns of rhyolite that rise from the canyon walls like ancient sentinels. The area has been a landmark since before the park's establishment. Indigenous peoples, including the Bannock and Shoshone, used Tower Creek as a navigation point when traveling through the region. Early explorers documented the falls in the 1860s. By the time Yellowstone became a national park in 1872, Tower Falls was already recognized as one of its signature features. A viewing platform was constructed at the falls in the early 1900s, providing tourists with a safe vantage point to observe the cascade. Over the decades, the platform was rebuilt and reinforced multiple times as erosion undercut the canyon rim. The falls remain one of the park's most photographed sites, accessible via a short trail from the Tower Fall General Store. Tower Creek is fed by snowmelt and groundwater from the Washburn Range to the south. Flow rates vary seasonally, high in late spring and early summer when snowpack melts, lower in autumn and winter. These variations are predictable and correspond to precipitation patterns and temperature. The falls have been monitored intermittently since the 1930s, with more systematic measurements beginning in the 1970s as part of broader hydrological studies within the park. In May 1976, the United States Geological Survey installed a stream gauge on Tower Creek approximately half a mile upstream from the falls. The gauge was part of a network designed to track water flow throughout Yellowstone, providing data for flood prediction, habitat management, and infrastructure planning. The device measured water level continuously, transmitting data via radio to a collection station at Tower Junction. The gauge was checked monthly by park maintenance crews. The data was reviewed quarterly by USGS hydrologists. For the first 6 months, the measurements showed exactly what was expected: gradual decline in flow as summer progressed, small fluctuations corresponding to rainstorms, no anomalies. Then, on November 3, 1976, something changed. A maintenance technician named Gerald Pacheco was conducting a routine inspection of the stream gauge when he noticed an irregularity in the data printout. The gauge recorded a sharp drop in water level at approximately 10:42 a.m., lasting 17 minutes before returning to the previous measurement. The drop corresponded to a 40% reduction in flow. Pacheco checked the gauge for mechanical failure. The equipment appeared functional. He reviewed weather records for the area. There had been no precipitation in the preceding week, no temperature fluctuations that would affect snowmelt. He hiked downstream to the falls and visually inspected the cascade. The flow appeared normal. Pacheco noted the anomaly in his maintenance log and submitted it with the monthly data report to the USGS. A hydrologist named Dr. Sharon Kowalczyk reviewed the report and requested clarification. Pacheco confirmed the data was accurate. Kowalczyk suggested the drop might have been caused by a temporary blockage upstream, a fallen tree or debris dam that had cleared naturally. Pacheco hiked the creek upstream from the gauge, searching for evidence of obstruction. He found none. The creek bed was clear. There were no signs of recent debris flows or landslides. The anomaly occurred again on March 10, 1977, 127 days after the first incident. The pattern was identical, 40% reduction in flow, lasting 17 minutes, occurring in the late morning. Pacheco documented the event and notified Kowalczyk. This time, Kowalczyk visited the site personally. She reviewed the gauge data, inspected the equipment, and conducted her own survey of the creek. She found no mechanical or environmental explanation for the flow reduction. Over the next year, the anomaly repeated at precise 127-day intervals. Kowalczyk began tracking the pattern systematically. She installed a second stream gauge downstream from the falls to determine whether the flow reduction was localized to the upper creek or affected the entire drainage. The downstream gauge recorded the same pattern, 40% reduction, 17-minute duration, 127-day intervals. Kowalczyk expanded her investigation. She reviewed precipitation records, snowpack data, and groundwater levels. None showed cyclical variations that matched the 127-day interval. She consulted with other hydrologists and geologists, searching for natural phenomena that might explain the pattern. One colleague suggested lunar tidal effects on groundwater, but the interval did not correspond to lunar cycles. Another proposed seismic activity affecting subsurface aquifers, but seismometers in the region detected no periodic tremors. In 1979, Kowalczyk published a brief paper in a USGS technical journal describing the Tower Creek anomaly. The paper included 3 years of flow data, documentation of the 127-day cycle, and a summary of investigated hypotheses. Kowalczyk concluded that the phenomenon remained unexplained and recommended continued monitoring. The paper attracted minimal attention. A few hydrologists contacted Kowalczyk to request additional data. One proposed that the cycle might be linked to geothermal activity. Yellowstone sits atop a supervolcano, and subsurface thermal dynamics could theoretically affect groundwater flow. But geothermal features in the Tower Creek drainage showed no corresponding cyclical behavior. The monitoring continued. The pattern continued. Every 127 days, without fail, Tower Creek's flow dropped by 40% for 17 minutes. In 1983, a park ranger named Louise Moretti was stationed at Tower Junction. She had read Kowalczyk's paper and became interested in the phenomenon. She began visiting the falls on days when the flow reduction was scheduled to occur, timing her visits to observe the event directly. Moretti witnessed the reduction on July 26, 1983. He arrived at the viewing platform at 10:30 a.m. The falls were flowing normally. At 10:41, the volume decreased noticeably. The sound changed. The deep roar of falling water became quieter, thinner. The mist that usually rose from the base of the falls diminished. The decrease was gradual, occurring over approximately 2 minutes, then holding steady for 15 minutes before reversing. Moretti described the experience in her personal journal. She noted that the reduction was visible, but not dramatic. Casual observers might not notice unless they were specifically watching. She also noted something else. During the 17-minute interval, the forest around the falls became quieter. Birds stopped calling. The usual background noise of the wilderness seemed to diminish along with the water. Moretti mentioned this observation to Kowalczyk during a chance meeting at park headquarters later that year. Kowalczyk had not noticed any acoustic changes during her own visits to the falls, but she acknowledged that her focus had been on the gauge data rather than the surrounding environment. In 1987, funding for the Tower Creek Monitoring Program was reduced as part of budget cuts affecting the USGS. The stream gauges were maintained, but active research on the flow anomaly was discontinued. Kowalczyk moved to a different project. The data continued to be collected automatically, archived with other hydrological records, but no longer actively analyzed. Gerald Pacheco, who had discovered the first anomaly, retired from park maintenance in 1992. Before leaving, he compiled a summary of all recorded flow reductions from 1976 through 1992. The pattern had continued without variation, 127 days between events, 17-minute duration, 40% reduction. The timing varied slightly, sometimes occurring in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, but the interval and magnitude remained constant. Pacheco submitted his summary to the Yellowstone Center for Resources. It was filed with Kowalczyk's original paper and other historical data. No follow-up research was initiated. In 2003, a graduate student named Marcus Delgado was researching hydrological anomalies in Yellowstone for his thesis. He came across Kowalczyk's paper and Pacheco's summary in the park archives. Intrigued by the pattern's consistency, Delgado requested access to the stream gauge data from the previous decade. The data confirmed that the pattern had continued unchanged. Delgado attempted to visit Tower Falls on a day when the flow reduction was predicted to occur. Weather prevented him from reaching the site. He made a second attempt 2 months later, but arrived after the interval had ended. He made a third attempt 4 months later and successfully observed the reduction from the viewing platform. He described the experience in his thesis. Like Moretti, he noted the change in sound and the decrease in mist. He also observed that during the 17-minute interval, the light seemed different, flatter, less dynamic, though he could not identify a specific change in brightness or color. Delgado proposed several new hypotheses for the phenomenon, including subsurface ice formation and periodic shifts in aquifer pressure. He recommended installation of additional monitoring equipment to track temperature, barometric pressure, and seismic activity during the flow reductions. His thesis was approved, but his recommendations were not implemented. The stream gauges at Tower Creek continued to operate. The data continues to show the same pattern. Park maintenance crews check the equipment periodically and note the ongoing anomaly in their logs. The cycle has now persisted for nearly 50 years. No comprehensive scientific investigation has been conducted since Kowalczyk's initial study. The phenomenon is mentioned occasionally in park literature as a curiosity, but is not included in public educational materials. Most visitors to Tower Falls are unaware that the waterfall they are photographing follows a rhythm that has no known natural cause. But there are people, rangers, maintenance workers, long-term residents of the Tower Junction area, who keep track of the cycle. They mark their calendars. They know when the next reduction will occur. Some of them visit the falls during those 17 minutes. They say it's worth seeing, if only to confirm that it's still happening. They say the falls look smaller, quieter, as if something is drawing the water away. and they say that when it happens, when the volume drops and the sound changes and the forest goes still, it feels like the land is holding its breath, waiting for something that never arrives, or waiting for something that's already there. Some warnings arrive before the events they describe. Cinnabar Basin sits in the hills north of Gardner, Montana, just outside Yellowstone National Park's northern boundary. The area takes its name from the historic mining town of Cinnabar, established in 1883 as a railroad terminus for visitors traveling to Yellowstone. The town thrived briefly, serving as the final stop on the Northern Pacific Railway line before passengers transferred to stagecoaches for the journey into the park. When the railroad extended directly to Gardner in 1903, Cinnabar was abandoned. Today, nothing remains but scattered foundation stones and a few rusted mining relics hidden in the sagebrush. The basin itself is a shallow depression surrounded by low hills covered in dry grass and scattered juniper. A few thermal features, small fumaroles and hot springs, dot the landscape, remnants of Yellowstone's volcanic influence extending beyond the park boundary. The area is public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management and sees occasional use by hikers, hunters, and geothermal enthusiasts exploring the lesser-known thermal areas north of the park. It is remote but accessible. The nearest paved road is 2 miles away. Cell phone service is non-existent. The terrain is open enough that visitors can see for miles in every direction, yet isolated enough that days can pass without encountering another person. In early October 1998, a hiker named Michael Torrance was exploring the thermal features near Cinnabar Basin. Torrance was a retired geology teacher from Bozeman, familiar with the area and experienced in backcountry travel. He had been visiting the basin periodically for several years, documenting changes in the small hot springs and fumaroles that punctuated the landscape. On the afternoon of October 7th, Torrance was examining a cluster of steam vents on the eastern edge of the basin when he noticed a piece of paper wedged between 2 rocks near the largest vent. The paper was white, slightly yellowed, and appeared to have been placed deliberately rather than blown there by wind. Torrance retrieved it and found it covered in handwritten text. The note, written in blue ink with neat, legible cursive, described a series of geothermal events. A new fumarole opening near the north rim of the basin, an increase in steam output from an existing hot spring, and a temperature rise in the runoff channel feeding into Bear Creek. The note included specific details, distances from landmarks, temperature estimates, descriptions of mineral deposits. Torrance found the note odd but assumed it was left by another geothermal enthusiast documenting recent observations. He pocketed the paper, intending to compare the descriptions with his own records. He continued his hike, spending another hour in the basin before returning to his vehicle. 3 weeks later, on October 28th, Torrance returned to Cinnabar Basin. He discovered that the geothermal changes described in the note had occurred exactly as written. A new fumarole had opened near the north rim, a location Torrance had visited on his previous trip and found inactive. The steam output from the hot spring had increased noticeably. The runoff channel temperature had risen, creating new mineral deposits along its banks. Torrance retrieved the note from his records and reread it. The descriptions matched the current conditions precisely, but the note had been written, or at least placed, 3 weeks before the changes occurred. Torrance considered several explanations. The note might have been older than he assumed, describing conditions that had existed previously and were now recurring. Or the author might have been a geologist with expertise in predicting thermal activity based on subtle precursor signs Torrance had missed. He mentioned the incident to a colleague at Montana State University, a geologist named Dr. Rebecca Salazar. Salazar was skeptical but interested. She asked Torrance if he had kept the note. He had, though he had not thought to preserve it carefully. The paper had been folded and refolded, carried in his pocket, and was beginning to show wear. Salazar examined the note. The handwriting was precise and consistent. The language was formal, almost archaic in its phrasing. There was no signature, no date, no indication of who had written it or why. Torrance continued visiting Cinnabar Basin over the following months. He found no additional notes. The geothermal features continued their usual fluctuations. Some vents grew more active, others declined, following no obvious pattern. In June 2000, a wildlife biologist named Catherine Dunn was conducting bird surveys in the hills surrounding Cinnabar Basin. While resting near a thermal feature on the basin's southern edge, she found a handwritten note tucked beneath a flat stone. The note described geothermal changes. A fumarole near the basin's center would increase its steam output. A hot spring on the western slope would develop new algae growth, and a previously dry area would begin showing moisture seepage. Dunn found the note curious, but assumed it was part of a research project. She photographed it with her camera and left it where she had found it, not wanting to disturb what might be official monitoring documentation. 4 weeks later, Dunn returned to the basin to continue her surveys. The changes described in the note had occurred. The fumarole was venting more steam. The hot spring showed bright orange and green thermophilic algae that had not been present during her previous visit. The dry area was now damp, with small pools of warm water collecting in depressions. Dunn contacted the Bureau of Land Management to ask if they were conducting geothermal monitoring in the area. The BLM office in Billings had no record of active research projects at Cinnabar Basin. Dunn described the note and the accurate predictions. The BLM representative suggested it might be the work of a graduate student conducting unauthorized field work. Dunn attempted to relocate the note during a subsequent visit, but could not find it. Her photograph showed the handwriting clearly, the same neat cursive, the same formal phrasing Torrance had described. Over the next 4 years, 5 more hikers reported finding similar notes in different locations around Cinnabar Basin. Each note described geothermal changes that had not yet occurred, but would manifest within weeks of the note being found. The handwriting in every instance, based on descriptions provided by those who found them, appeared identical. A park ranger named Thomas Galloway, stationed in Gardner, began collecting these reports informally. Galloway had heard about Torrance's experience and started asking hikers and researchers if they had encountered anything unusual at Cinnabar Basin. Over time, several people mentioned the notes. In 2002, a photographer named Elena Vasquez found a note near the basin's northern rim. It described the formation of a new hot spring approximately 30 yards west of her position. The note specified the spring would appear within 2 weeks, would reach a temperature of 148 degrees Fahrenheit, and would produce milky white runoff due to dissolved silica. Vasquez kept the note and returned to the basin 17 days later. The hot spring existed exactly as described in the exact location specified, with milky white runoff flowing downslope. Vasquez brought the note to Galloway. He compared it with Dunn's photograph and Torrance's description. The handwriting was identical. The phrasing was consistent. All notes shared certain linguistic peculiarities: formal sentence structure, specific use of directional terminology, precise temperature and distance measurements. Galloway contacted Dr. Salazar at Montana State and provided her with Vasquez's note and Dunn's photograph. Salazar analyzed the handwriting and confirmed the visual similarity. She also noted something else. The ink appeared fresh in all cases. There was no fading, no weather internals that would suggest the notes had been exposed to the elements for extended periods. Salazar proposed a hypothesis. The notes were being placed by someone with advanced knowledge of geothermal systems, perhaps a researcher conducting long-term monitoring who could predict activity based on data not visible to casual observers. But this hypothesis failed to account for the precision of the predictions or the fact that no research permits had been issued for Cinnabar Basin. In 2003, Galloway began visiting the basin regularly, hoping to encounter whoever was leaving the notes. He made 12 trips over 6 months. He found no notes. He encountered no other visitors. The geothermal features continued their usual activity. In August 2004, a graduate student named James Kowalski found the last documented note. It was placed on a flat rock near the basin's center, held in place by a small stone. The note described the temporary cessation of activity in 3 separate fumaroles, specific locations, specific durations, specific dates. Kowalski photographed the note and left it in place, marking the location with a GPS waypoint. He returned 6 days later with a colleague. The note was gone. Over the following 3 weeks, the 3 fumaroles ceased venting exactly as described for the durations specified. Kowalski submitted a report to the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology describing the incident and requesting an investigation. The Bureau acknowledged the report, but did not initiate formal research. A staff geologist suggested the phenomenon might be related to cyclical geothermal patterns that experienced observers could learn to predict. No notes have been found at Cinnabar Basin since 2004. Galloway retired from the National Park Service in 2007. Before leaving, he compiled all documented accounts of the notes, witness statements, photographs, GPS coordinates, and submitted the file to the Yellowstone Center for Resources. The file was archived but not investigated. Dr. Salazar continued researching geothermal systems in the Yellowstone region but did not publish anything about the Cinnabar Basin notes. In a private correspondence in 2012, she wrote that the phenomenon remained unexplained and that the lack of physical evidence made systematic study impossible. The basin remains open to the public. Hikers and geothermal enthusiasts still visit occasionally. The thermal features continue to fluctuate. New vents open, old springs go dormant, temperatures rise and fall. But there are people, those who found the notes, those who heard the stories, who sometimes return to the basin and search the rocks near the steam vents. They look for paper that shouldn't be there, for handwriting that describes things that haven't happened yet. None of them have found anything. But they say the basin feels different now, as if something that was present for 6 years simply stopped paying attention, or stopped needing to warn anyone. They say the notes were always placed in locations where new thermal activity would soon appear, as if whoever wrote them was marking the spots in advance. And they say that sometimes, when the wind is still and the steam rises straight up from the vents, they wonder if the notes are still being written, just no longer left where anyone can find them. There are patterns in nature that repeat with a precision nature does not possess. Slough Creek flows through the northeastern corner of Yellowstone National Park, originating in the Absaroka Mountains and traveling roughly 25 miles before joining the Lamar River near the historic Buffalo Ranch. The creek passes through meadows, forests, and steep canyon sections, creating habitat diversity that supports one of the park's healthiest populations of Yellowstone cutthroat trout. The upper sections of the creek, accessible only by hiking several miles from the nearest trailhead, are considered some of the finest fly fishing waters in North America. The creek has been fished recreationally since the late 1800s. By the mid-20th century, it had developed a reputation among serious anglers as a destination for large, wild trout in pristine surroundings. The National Park Service manages Slough Creek under catch and release regulations, ensuring the trout population remains sustainable while allowing visitors to experience the waterway much as it has existed for centuries. Cutthroat trout in Yellowstone bear scars naturally. Predators, otters, eagles, herons, leave marks when attacks fail. Parasites create lesions. Spawning interactions cause abrasions. Fishermen who spend time on Slough Creek become familiar with these variations. Each scar tells a story specific to that fish's encounters with the environment. But in the summer of 2001, a pattern emerged that told no recognizable story. On July 18, 2001, a fisherman named Gregory Ham was working a section of Slough Creek approximately 3 miles upstream from the campground. Ham was an experienced angler who visited Yellowstone annually and kept detailed records of his catches, including photographs and measurements. He caught and released a cutthroat trout estimated at 17 inches, a respectable size for the creek. While handling the fish before release, Ham noticed 3 parallel scars behind the left gill plate. The marks were clean, evenly spaced, and appeared healed, old injuries, not recent trauma. Ham photographed the fish as he typically did and released it. He noted the scars in his fishing journal, but thought little of them at the time. 3 years later, in August 2004, Ham returned to Slough Creek and fished the same general area. He caught a cutthroat trout of similar size, and while preparing to release it, noticed the same scarring pattern. 3 parallel marks behind the left gill plate, identical in spacing and appearance to the fish he had photographed in 2001. Ham assumed he had recaught the same fish. It was not uncommon for anglers to catch the same trout multiple times over the years, particularly in waters managed under catch and release. He photographed the fish and compared the new image with his 2001 photograph when he returned home. The fish were not the same. The spot patterns on cutthroat trout are unique to each individual, similar to fingerprints. The 2 fish had different spot configurations. They were different trout, but the scars were identical, same location, same spacing, same depth. Ham found this odd but filed it as a coincidence. Scars could result from similar injuries. 2 fish attacked by the same predator species might bear similar marks. In September 2007, Ham caught another cutthroat trout on Slough Creek, this time in a section approximately half a mile downstream from his previous catches. The fish had the same 3 parallel scars behind the left gill plate. Ham photographed it and compared the image with his earlier records. Again, the spot patterns confirmed this was a different individual. Again, the scars were identical. Ham began asking other fishermen if they had observed similar scarring. Over the next year, he spoke with guides, regular visitors, and local anglers who fished Slough Creek frequently. 2 guides recalled seeing fish with 3 parallel scars, but had not thought to document them. A fisherman from Idaho named Robert Finch confirmed he had caught a trout with matching scars in 2006 and had a photograph to prove it. In 2009, Ham contacted Dr. Sarah Voss, a fisheries biologist with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He sent her his photographs and described the pattern he had observed. Voss reviewed the images and agreed the scarring was unusual. She asked if Ham would be willing to collect a specimen if he encountered another fish with the marks. Ham agreed, though he expressed reluctance to kill a trout for research purposes. Voss assured him that a single specimen, if the scarring proved scientifically significant, would be justified. On June 23, 2010, Ham caught a cutthroat trout with the 3 parallel scars. He euthanized it according to ethical guidelines and preserved it in a cooler with ice. He delivered the specimen to Voss's laboratory in Bozeman 2 days later. Voss conducted a detailed examination of the fish. The scars were located precisely 4 millimeters behind the left operculum, the bony plate covering the gills. They were 3 in number, parallel, each 7 millimeters long, spaced 3 millimeters apart. The tissue had healed completely, indicating the injuries were at least several months old, possibly years. Voss examined the scars under magnification. The edges were clean and uniform, inconsistent with tearing or puncture wounds typically caused by predators. The depth was consistent across all 3 marks, suggesting they had been inflicted simultaneously by a single event or mechanism. Voss consulted with colleagues specializing in fish pathology and injury analysis. One suggested the marks could result from a specialized trapping or handling tool, though no such tool was known to be used in Yellowstone. Another proposed the scars might be caused by a parasite or disease that produced uniform lesions, but no known pathogen affecting cutthroat trout produced this specific pattern. In 2011, Ham caught 2 more fish with identical scars. He preserved both and delivered them to Voss. She conducted the same examination and found the scarring indistinguishable from the first specimen. Same location, same dimensions, same spacing. Voss expanded her investigation. She contacted the National Park Service and requested access to historical records of fish health surveys conducted on Slough Creek. The records, maintained by the Yellowstone Center for Resources, included data from population assessments dating back to the 1980s. Voss searched for references to unusual scarring or injury patterns. She found none. She also reached out to other fisheries biologists working in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, asking if they had observed similar patterns in other waters. None had. In 2012, Voss published a brief note in a regional fisheries journal describing the Slough Creek scarring phenomenon. She included photographs of the scars, measurements, and a summary of her findings. She concluded that the cause remained unknown and recommended continued monitoring. The publication generated limited response. A biologist from Wyoming contacted Voss to suggest the scars might result from gill net injuries, though gill netting was illegal in Yellowstone and had not been documented on Slough Creek. Another researcher proposed the marks could be inflicted by equipment used during scientific surveys, but park records showed no tagging or sampling operations on Slough Creek that would produce such injuries. Over the next decade, additional fish with the 3 parallel scars were reported by fishermen. Ham documented 4 more between 2013 and 2020. A fishing guide named Patricia Schultz caught 3 fish with matching scars in 2015. An angler from California named Kenneth Hayward photographed a scarred fish in 2018 and submitted the image to the park's fisheries program. In 2019, Voss received funding to conduct a small-scale genetic study of the scarred fish. She obtained tissue samples from 7 specimens collected over 9 years and analyzed their genetic markers. The fish were genetically distinct, different individuals, not clones or close relatives. They represented different year classes, suggesting the scarring occurred across multiple generations. Voss also analyzed the scar tissue itself, hoping to identify residual material or chemical signatures that might indicate the source of the injuries. She found nothing unusual. The tissue was normal-healed muscle and skin, with no foreign material embedded, and no trace elements that would suggest contact with man-made objects or chemicals. Her final report, submitted to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks in 2020, concluded that the scarring pattern remained unexplained. She noted that the phenomenon appeared limited to Slough Creek and had not been observed in adjacent waterways. She recommended continued documentation, but acknowledged that without identifying the cause, no management action could be taken. The report was filed with other fisheries research documents. No follow-up study was commissioned. Ham continues to fish Slough Creek annually. He has photographed 12 fish with the 3 parallel scars over 2 decades. He maintains a personal database of the images, organized by date and location. In a letter to Voss in 2022, he noted that the scarring appears most frequently in fish caught from a specific 2-mile stretch of the creek between the first and second meadows, though fish with the marks have been found both upstream and downstream from this area. Voss retired from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks in 2023. Before leaving, she donated her research files on the Slough Creek scarring to the University of Montana's archives. The files include photographs, tissue samples, genetic data, and correspondence with other researchers. They are available for review but have attracted no academic interest. The phenomenon continues. Fishermen still report catching cutthroat trout with the 3 parallel scars. The marks remain identical, same location, same spacing, same depth, appearing on different fish across years and locations within Slough Creek. But there are guides who work the creek regularly, who have caught dozens of these fish, who have handled them and photographed them and released them back into the cold water. They say the scars feel deliberate. They say the precision is wrong, too exact for something that happened by chance. They say when they hold these fish, when they see the 3 marks lined up perfectly behind the gills, they think about what kind of event would leave the same signature on different animals years apart. And they say that sometimes, when they're wading the creek alone in the early morning, when the mist is rising and the water is still dark, they wonder if the scars are marks of injury or marks of selection, something choosing which fish to touch and which to leave alone. There are places where sound takes longer to come back than it should. Jardine is a ghost town in the mountains 6 miles northeast of Gardner, Montana, just outside Yellowstone National Park's northern boundary. The town was established in 1898 after arsenic and gold deposits were discovered in the surrounding hills. At its peak in the early 1900s, Jardine supported nearly 1,000 residents with hotels, saloons, a school, and the infrastructure necessary for a working mining community. The Jardine Mine, later known as the Revenue Mine, operated intermittently for decades, producing arsenic for agricultural pesticides and small quantities of gold. The mine closed permanently in 1948. The town declined rapidly. By the 1960s, Jardine was mostly abandoned. A few structures remained standing, wooden houses collapsing into themselves, the old company store, rusted mining equipment scattered across the hillsides. The mine entrances were sealed with steel gates to prevent unauthorized entry, though vandals and explorers occasionally broke through. The tunnels extend deep into Bear Gulch, following ore veins through fractured granite and schist. Some passages reach over a mile into the mountain, others dead end after a few hundred feet. The mine was never fully mapped. Different companies worked different sections over the years, and records of the tunnel layouts were either lost or never properly consolidated. What remains is a fragmentary archive of survey maps, production records, and accident reports filed with the Montana Bureau of Mines. The mine is officially closed. Trespassing is illegal, but the gates are old and the terrain is remote. People still go inside. In June 2003, a group of 4 cavers from Bozeman, Marcus Delgado, Patricia Volkov, Stephen Kowalski, and Jennifer Ruiz, obtained permission from the landowner to explore portions of the Jardine mine for a personal documentation project. The group had experience with abandoned mines and understood the risks: unstable rock, bad air, unmarked shafts. They carried proper equipment, including helmets, lights, gas detectors, and rope. They entered the mine through the main portal on the morning of June 14th. The tunnel descended at a shallow angle, supported by rotting timber and occasional steel beams. After approximately 300 feet, the passage branched. The group took the left branch, following it for another 200 feet until they reached a chamber the size of a small room, a stope where ore had been extracted, leaving a void in the rock. Delgado tested the acoustics by clapping his hands twice. The sound echoed normally, sharp, immediate, fading quickly. The group continued deeper. They passed through 2 more chambers without incident, documenting the tunnels with photographs and notes. At approximately 11:30 a.m., they entered a larger chamber, roughly 30 feet wide and 20 feet high. The walls showed tool marks where ore had been chipped away. Timber supports framed the entrance. The floor was uneven, covered in rock fragments and debris. Kowalski clapped his hands to test the echo. The sound returned approximately 4 seconds later. He clapped again. Same delay. Delgado noted the timing seemed wrong for the chamber's size. In a space that size, an echo should return in less than a second. He vocalized a short shout. The echo came back after roughly 5 seconds, faint but distinct. The group discussed the anomaly. Volkov suggested the sound might be traveling down an adjoining tunnel they couldn't see, reflecting off distant walls and returning through the same passage. Kowalski walked the perimeter of the chamber, searching for openings. He found none. The chamber appeared to be a terminal point, no exits except the tunnel they had entered through. Oy. Ruiz proposed they time the echo more precisely. Delgado used his watch while Kowalski produced a sharp sound by striking 2 rocks together. The echo returned in 4.8 seconds. They repeated the test multiple times. The delay remained consistent between 4.5 and 5 seconds, depending on the type of sound produced. Delgado calculated that for sound traveling at approximately 1,100 feet per second, the echo would need to travel roughly 5,000 feet to produce a 4.5-second delay, meaning the sound would have to reach a reflective surface 2,500 feet away and return. But the chamber had no visible openings, and the mine's historical maps showed no tunnels extending that far from the main portal. The group decided to document the phenomenon and report it to someone with acoustic expertise. They recorded several audio samples using Volkov's digital recorder, capturing the delayed echoes. They took measurements of the chamber and noted its location relative to the mine entrance. Then they continued exploring for another hour before exiting the mine in the early afternoon. Back in Bozeman, Delgado contacted Dr. Alan Pritchard, a geophysicist at Montana State University with experience in subsurface acoustics. Pritchard listened to the audio recordings and reviewed the group's notes. He found the delay anomalous, but suggested several possible explanations. Unmapped tunnels creating unexpected sound paths, acoustic resonance amplifying certain frequencies, or temperature and humidity variations affecting sound speed. Pritchard expressed interest in conducting a formal study. He proposed using specialized equipment to map the chamber's acoustic properties and potentially discover hidden passages. Delgado agreed to facilitate access to the mine. In August 2003, Pritchard organized a small research team consisting of himself, a graduate student named Laura Medina, and a technician named Raymond Kostick. They obtained permission from the landowner and entered the mine on August 9th. With acoustic measurement equipment, including calibrated microphones, sound sources, and recording devices. The team reached the chamber Delgado had described. Pritchard set up microphones at multiple positions and generated test sounds using a controlled acoustic source. The echoes returned with delays ranging from 4.2 to 5.1 seconds, consistent with what Delgado's group had observed. Pritchard attempted to triangulate the source of the reflection using the multiple microphones. The data was inconclusive. The sound appeared to return from the same direction it was sent, suggesting a reflective surface directly opposite the sound source, but no such surface was visible. Medina proposed they explore adjacent sections of the mine to search for connecting passages that might explain the acoustic path. The team spent 2 hours mapping nearby tunnels. They found no openings that connected to the chamber. On their second day in the mine, August 10th, Pritchard's team set up more sophisticated equipment. They used a high-frequency sound pulse to probe for voids or cavities in the rock surrounding the chamber. The results showed solid rock on all sides except the entrance tunnel. Kostick noted something else. While reviewing the audio recordings, he observed that the returning echo sounded slightly different from the original sounds, not in pitch or tone, but in a quality he described as texture. The echoes seemed flattened, as if passing through something that absorbed certain frequencies while allowing others through. Pritchard reviewed Kostick's observation and confirmed the spectral analysis showed minor frequency attenuation. This was not unusual. Rock surfaces absorb some sound energy during reflection, but the specific pattern of attenuation did not match typical acoustic signatures for granite or schist. The team planned to conduct additional tests on their third day. But on the evening of August 10th, Pritchard received a call from the university informing him of a scheduling conflict with another project. He explained to Medina and Kostick that they would need to conclude the fieldwork earlier than planned and return to Bozeman the following day. The research was never completed. Pritchard submitted a preliminary report to the university describing the anomalous echo delay, but offering no definitive explanation. The report recommended follow-up study, but noted that access to the mine was difficult and funding for such research was limited. In 2005, a documentary filmmaker named Philip Brennan heard about the Jardine mine acoustics through a mutual acquaintance of Delgado. Brennan contacted Pritchard and requested an interview. Pritchard declined, saying the research had been inconclusive, and he preferred not to speculate publicly about phenomena he could not explain. Brennan contacted Delgado instead. Delgado described the initial discovery and provided copies of his photographs and audio. Recordings. Brennan visited Jardine and filmed the exterior of the mine, but did not enter the tunnels. His documentary, which covered various abandoned mining sites in Montana, included a brief segment on the Jardine mine echoes. The segment aired on a regional cable channel in 2006 and attracted minimal attention. In 2011, a group of urban explorers from Idaho entered the Jardine mine without permission. One of them, a man named Douglas Pemberton, later posted about the experience on an online forum. He described finding a chamber where sounds echoed with unusual delay. He said the experience had been disorienting. The echoes sounded like they were coming from farther away than the walls, as if the space were larger than it appeared. Pemberton's post generated brief discussion, but no organized effort to investigate further. The mine remained closed and unmarked, accessible only to those willing to bypass the deteriorating gates. In 2018, the property containing the Jardine mine was sold to a private owner who reinforced the mine entrances with new steel barriers and posted no trespassing signs. Access became more difficult. Reports of people entering the mine decreased. Pritchard retired from Montana State University in 2020. Before leaving, he donated his research files, including the Jardine mine acoustic study, to the university archives. The files are available for review, but have not been accessed by researchers. Medina completed her graduate degree and now works as an environmental consultant in Oregon. In a brief email exchange in 2022, she confirmed that the Jardine mine study had ended prematurely due to scheduling issues, but declined to provide additional details. She said the phenomenon remained unexplained and that she had no plans to revisit the site. Kostick left academia shortly after the Jardine fieldwork and now works in software development. He has not responded to inquiries about the mine. The mine remained sealed. The tunnels remain dark. The chamber where the echoes return late remains somewhere in the mountain, unmapped and unvisited. But there are people, those who entered before the new gates, those who heard the sound come back wrong, who say the delay is not the strangest part. They say the strangest part is the feeling that accompanies the echo, the sense that the sound is traveling somewhere it shouldn't be able to go, passing through a space that doesn't appear on any map. They say when you stand in that chamber and make a noise and wait for it to come back, you start to wonder what the sound is touching on its way, what surface it's bouncing off that you can't see. And they say that sometimes, in the silence between the sound and its return, you can almost hear something else, not an echo, something answering. Some rivers pause in ways that water should not pause. The Yellowstone River is the longest undammed river in the contiguous United States, flowing 678 miles from its source in the Absaroka Mountains of Wyoming through Montana to its confluence with the Missouri River near the North Dakota border. The river drains an area of nearly 70,000 square miles, carrying snowmelt, groundwater, and tributary flows through wilderness, ranch land, and scattered communities. It is a river defined by its continuity, wild, uninterrupted, moving as rivers have moved for millennia. The United States Geological Survey has monitored the Yellowstone River since the early 20th century, installing stream gauges at strategic points along its length to measure water levels, flow rates, and seasonal variations. These gauges operate continuously, recording data every 15 minutes and transmitting it to central databases where hydrologists track patterns, predict floods, and manage water resources. The section of the Yellowstone River near Livingston, Montana, has been monitored since 1937. The gauge sits on the riverbank approximately 3 miles downstream from the town, measuring water level with a pressure sensor submerged in the flow. The data is reliable, consistent, and, until 1994, unremarkable. On April 6, 1994, a hydrologist named Dr. Catherine Torres was reviewing routine flow data from the Livingston gauge when she noticed an anomaly in the record. At 11:47 a.m. on that date, the water level had dropped to an unmeasurable reading, effectively zero, for exactly 30 seconds before returning to its previous measurement. Torres assumed the gauge had malfunctioned. She flagged the data point for maintenance review and continued her analysis. A technician inspected the gauge the following week and found it functioning normally. The pressure sensor, data logger, and transmission equipment all passed diagnostic tests. The technician concluded the anomaly was likely a brief electrical fault that had self-corrected. 3 years later, on June 19, 1997, the same anomaly occurred. Water level dropped to zero at 3:12 p.m., held for 30 seconds, then resumed normal readings. This time, Torres requested a more thorough investigation. The gauge was removed, tested in a laboratory, and reinstalled. No mechanical or electronic faults were detected. Torres expanded her review to include data from other gauges along the Yellowstone River. She found no corresponding anomalies at upstream or downstream stations during the times when the Livingston gauge recorded zero flow. The phenomenon appeared isolated to a single location. In August 1997, Torres visited the gauge site during a routine field inspection. She observed the river flowing normally, strong current, consistent depth, no visible obstructions or diversions. She spoke with local residents and fishermen, asking if anyone had noticed unusual changes in the river's behavior. No one had. The anomaly occurred again on September 4, 2000. This time, Torres happened to be reviewing real-time data when it occurred. She watched the digital readout drop to zero at 7:33 a.m., hold steady for 30 seconds, then jump back to the previous level. She immediately called the field office in Bozeman and requested that a technician visit the site to observe the river directly. The technician, a man named Gerald Pacheco, arrived at the gauge within 2 hours. He inspected the equipment and visually observed the river. Everything appeared normal. Pacheco waded into the river near the gauge and felt the current, strong and continuous. He saw no evidence that the flow had stopped or diminished. Torres and Pacheco reviewed the data together. The 30-second gap was clearly recorded. But physical observation showed no corresponding change in the river's behavior. Torres proposed installing a secondary gauge 50 feet upstream to determine if the phenomenon was limited to the specific sensor location or affected the river itself. The secondary gauge was installed in October 2000. Both gauges operated in parallel, recording data independently. For the next 3 years, both showed normal flow patterns with no anomalies. Then, on November 11, 2003, both gauges simultaneously recorded zero flow for 30 seconds at 2:09 p.m. Torres was in her office in Helena when the data came through. She reviewed the timestamp and confirmed that both gauges, operating on separate power sources using different sensor technologies, had recorded the identical anomaly at the same moment. She contacted Pacheco and requested he visit the site immediately. Pacheco arrived at the river within 3 hours. He observed both gauges and found them functioning normally. He waded into the river and again felt continuous current. He took manual depth measurements and found water levels consistent with the gauge readings before and after the gap. There was no physical evidence that the river had stopped flowing. Torres began compiling a comprehensive report on the phenomenon. She documented 6 occurrences between 1994 and 2003, each separated by approximately 3 years, each lasting exactly 30 seconds. She noted that the anomalies occurred at different times of day and in different seasons, eliminating solar or tidal influences. She reviewed meteorological data and found no correlation with weather patterns. She examined seismic records and found no earthquakes or tremors coinciding with the events. In January 2004, Torres submitted her report to the USGS Regional Office in Denver. She requested funding for a more extensive monitoring program, including video surveillance of the river and additional sensor arrays. The request was reviewed by a panel of hydrologists and geologists. Their response, received in March, acknowledged the anomaly, but suggested it was likely an instrumentation artifact, perhaps electromagnetic interference or a software glitch affecting the data recording system. Torres disagreed, but lacked the resources to conduct independent research. She continued monitoring the Livingston gauge as part of her regular duties, but did not pursue further investigation. The anomaly occurred again on January 27, 2007. By this time, Torres had retired from the USGS. The current hydrologist responsible for the Livingston station, Dr. Martin Ostergaard, reviewed the data and found Torres's original report in the archives. He contacted her by phone to discuss the phenomenon. Torres explained her findings and her frustration with the lack of institutional support for further study. She told Ostergaard that the 30-second gaps appeared to follow a rough 3-year cycle, though the exact intervals varied slightly. She said she believed the phenomenon was real, not an equipment error, but had no explanation for what caused it. Ostergaard decided to monitor the situation closely. He installed a third gauge at the Livingston site and added a webcam aimed at the river to capture visual evidence during future anomalies. He also reached out to colleagues at other agencies, asking if similar phenomena had been observed on other rivers. None had. On March 14, 2010, the anomaly occurred again. All 3 gauges recorded 0 flow for 30 seconds at 9:56 a.m. The webcam footage showed the river flowing normally before, during, and after the event. There was no visible change in water level, current speed, or surface conditions. Ostergaard reviewed the footage frame by frame. He could detect no anomalies. The river appeared identical in every frame. Yet the gauges, 3 independent instruments using different measurement principles, all recorded the same impossible data: 30 seconds of 0 flow. Ostergaard submitted a new report to the USGS, including the webcam footage and updated data analysis. This time, the response was more receptive. A team of researchers from the USGS Water Science Center in Montana visited the Livingston site in June 2010. They examined the gauges, reviewed the historical data, and conducted their own measurements of the river. The team's preliminary findings, issued in August 2010, confirmed that the gauges were functioning correctly and that the anomalies were consistently recorded across multiple instruments. However, the report stopped short of declaring the phenomenon real. The lead researcher, Dr. Sharon Kowalczyk, noted that without observable changes in the river itself, the data gaps remained unexplained, but could not be definitively attributed to an actual cessation of flow. Kowalczyk proposed a hypothesis. The gauges might be detecting a brief pressure equalization event caused by subsurface water dynamics, perhaps a momentary balance between surface flow and groundwater pressure that created a false zero reading. But this hypothesis could not explain why 3 different types of sensors would respond identically to such an event. The research team recommended continued monitoring, but did not allocate additional resources. The Livingston Gauge network remained in place, recording data as it always had. The phenomenon has occurred 3 more times since 2010. In May 2013, August 2016, and October 2019. Each time the pattern held 30 seconds of recorded zero flow. No visible change in the river, no upstream or downstream anomalies. Ostergaard continues to monitor the Livingston station. He maintains a detailed log of each occurrence, including exact timestamps, weather conditions, and any contextual information that might prove relevant. He has shared this data with researchers at several universities, but none have undertaken formal studies. In a conversation recorded in 2021, Ostergaard said the phenomenon defied conventional hydrological principles. He said rivers do not stop flowing for 30 seconds and then resume without cause. He said the data suggested something was interrupting the flow or interrupting the measurement of flow in a way that left no physical trace. He also said something else, though he did not include it in any official report. He said that on 2 occasions he had been standing near the gauge site when the anomaly occurred. He said both times he felt a change in the air, a brief stillness, like the moment before a storm, though the sky remained clear. He said the sound of the river seemed to flatten, to lose dimension for just a moment before returning to normal. He said he could not prove what he felt. He said it might have been suggestion, the mind creating sensation to match expectation, but he said it felt real. The Yellowstone River continues to flow. The gauges continue to record. Every 3 years, give or take a few months, the data shows 30 seconds where the water level reads 0. And in those 30 seconds, something happens that instruments can measure, but eyes cannot see. Something that leaves no mark on the surface, no change in the current, no evidence in the physical world, just a gap in the record, repeating across decades, always the same duration, always unexplained. And the people who monitor the river, who watch the data stream in real time, who stand on the banks and listen to the water move, say that when the gap appears, they feel it, not as absence, as presence. Something passing through the river for exactly half a minute, leaving everything unchanged except the numbers that say, for that brief time, the water was not there, or was somewhere else entirely. Some instruments measure the future instead of the present. Electric Peak rises to 11,155 feet at the northwestern edge of the Gallatin Range, straddling the boundary between Yellowstone National Park and Montana. It is the highest point in the Gallatin Range and one of the most prominent peaks visible from the park's northern sections. The mountain earned its name in 1872 when members of the Hayden Geological Survey reported feeling electrical charges and hearing buzzing sounds near the summit during a thunderstorm, a phenomenon attributed to the peak's exposure and the prevalence of lightning strikes in the area. The mountain is remote and challenging to access. The standard climbing route from the north involves a strenuous 9-mile hike with over 3,000 feet of elevation gain, crossing steep scree slopes and exposed ridges. Weather conditions can change rapidly. Afternoon thunderstorms are common in summer. Winter brings extreme cold and heavy snow. The summit sees perhaps a few dozen visitors each year, mostly experienced mountaineers. In 2005, the National Weather Service, in partnership with the United States Geological Survey, installed an automated weather station near the summit of Electric Peak as part of a high-elevation monitoring network. The station was designed to collect temperature, humidity, wind speed, barometric pressure, and precipitation data in an environment where human observation was impractical. The equipment was solar-powered with battery backup, housed in a weatherproof enclosure, and programmed to transmit data via satellite every hour. The installation was completed in July 2005 by a team of technicians transported to the summit by helicopter. The station operated as expected for 6 years, providing valuable data on high-altitude weather patterns and contributing to regional climate models. Then, in March 2011, the data began arriving early. A meteorologist named Dr. Isabel Rains was reviewing temperature trends from the Electric Peak station when she noticed an inconsistency. The station had transmitted a temperature reading of 28 degrees Fahrenheit at 6 a.m. on March 14th. However, when she cross-referenced the data with observations from lower elevation stations and satellite imagery, the temperature at Electric Peak at that time should have been closer to 18 degrees. Rains flagged the discrepancy and continued reviewing subsequent data. At 6 p.m. on March 14th, the station transmitted a reading of 32 degrees. By that time, temperatures at nearby stations were rising, and Rains calculated that Electric Peak should indeed have reached approximately 32 degrees, but not until 6 a.m. the following morning. She reviewed the previous 24 hours of data. The pattern became clear. Every temperature reading from the Electric Peak station matched the actual temperature that would be recorded 12 hours later. Rains assumed the station's internal clock had been misconfigured, causing timestamps to be offset by 12 hours. She submitted a maintenance request to correct the error. A technician reviewed the station's programming remotely and confirmed that the clock was set correctly and synchronized with satellite time signals. Rains requested physical inspection of the equipment. In June 2011, a team was sent to Electric Peak to examine the station. The technicians found the equipment functioning normally. The temperature sensor, data logger, and transmission system all passed diagnostic tests. The clock showed the correct time. The technicians recalibrated the instruments and transmitted a test signal. The test data matched expected values. The team descended the mountain, confident the issue had been resolved. The following week, the station resumed transmitting temperature readings 12 hours ahead of actual conditions. Rains documented the pattern meticulously. She compared Electric Peak data with readings from stations at similar elevations in the region. She analyzed weather models to predict temperatures 12 hours in advance and found that the Electric Peak station's premature readings consistently matched those predictions with remarkable accuracy. The station was not malfunctioning. It was reporting correct data, just too early. In September 2011, Rains submitted a detailed report to the National Weather Service describing the anomaly. She included statistical analysis showing that the 12-hour offset had persisted for 6 months, with temperature readings accurate to within 1 degree of conditions that would occur half a day later. She noted that other measurements, humidity, wind speed, pressure, remained synchronized with real-time conditions. Only temperature was affected. The report was reviewed by a senior meteorologist named Dr. Nathan Vargas, who found the phenomenon implausible. He suggested that Rains had misinterpreted the data or that there was an undiscovered software error in the data processing system. He recommended replacing the station entirely to eliminate any possibility of equipment malfunction. In October 2011, a new weather station was installed on Electric Peak, using different sensor technology and a completely independent data logging system. The original station was removed and sent to a laboratory for analysis. Technicians disassembled the equipment and tested every component. They found no faults. The new station began transmitting data on October 23, 2011. For 3 days, the readings appeared normal. Then, on October 26th, the 12-hour offset resumed. Rains confirmed the pattern using the same analytical methods she had applied to the original station's data. The new equipment was transmitting temperature readings that accurately reflected Conditions 12 hours in the future. Dr. Vargas visited Raines's office in Bozeman to review the findings in person. He examined her analysis and verified her calculations. He could not identify any errors in her methodology. He contacted the equipment manufacturer and requested their assessment. The manufacturer reviewed the data logs and confirmed the station was operating within specifications. They had no explanation for the temporal offset. In January 2012, Vargas authorized a third installation, this time using equipment from a different manufacturer with additional redundancy and monitoring safeguards. The installation team also placed a standalone temperature logger at the site, independent of the main weather station, to provide a control data set. The new station was activated on February 8, 2012. The standalone logger recorded real-time temperatures. The main station, after a brief period of normal operation, resumed transmitting readings 12 hours ahead of the standalone logger. Vargas compiled a comprehensive report and submitted it to the National Weather Service headquarters. The report documented 18 months of anomalous data, 3 separate equipment installations, and consistent replication of the 12-hour offset. He included testimony from technicians, analysis from Raines, and verification from the equipment manufacturers. The response, received in April 2012, acknowledged the anomaly but offered no explanation. The headquarters office suggested that the phenomenon might be related to localized atmospheric conditions unique to electric peak, perhaps thermal inversion layers or electromagnetic interference from lightning activity affecting the sensors in unpredictable ways. Vargas found this explanation unsatisfying. Atmospheric conditions could not cause a sensor to accurately predict future temperatures with such precision. But he had no alternative hypothesis and no budget for further investigation. In June 2012, the decision was made to discontinue the electric peak monitoring program. The official justification was that the station's data had become unreliable and that maintaining equipment at such a remote, high-altitude location was not cost-effective given the technical difficulties encountered. The final weather station was deactivated on July 15, 2012. It was not removed from the mountain. The cost of helicopter transport was deemed unjustifiable. The equipment remains on electric peak, dormant and weathering under the sun and snow. Raines continued working for the National Weather Service until 2017, when she accepted a position with a private meteorological consulting firm. Before leaving, she compiled all data from the electric peak stations, original readings, analysis, equipment logs, correspondence, and submitted it to the National Climatic Data Center for archival. The data is accessible to researchers, but has not been studied beyond initial review. In a recorded interview in 2019, Raines stated that she remained convinced the phenomenon was real and could not be explained by equipment error or atmospheric anomalies. She said the station had effectively been reporting accurate temperatures from 12 hours in the future consistently for over a year across 3 different installations. She said she had found no precedent for such a phenomenon in meteorological literature. When asked what she believed caused the offset, Raines declined to speculate. She said only that the data spoke for itself and that discontinuing the monitoring program had eliminated the possibility of understanding what was happening on electric peak. Dr. Vargas retired from the National Weather Service in 2021. In a brief correspondence shortly before his retirement, he acknowledged that the electric peak case had been one of the most perplexing incidents of his career. He said he had reviewed the data many times over the years and never found an explanation that satisfied scientific principles. He said the station should not have been able to do what it did, yet the evidence was clear that it had. The deactivated weather station remains on electric peak. Mountaineers who summit the peak occasionally photograph the equipment. A white enclosure mounted on a metal frame, solar panels angled toward the sky, slowly degrading in the alpine environment. Some climbers have reported that the station's digital display, though no longer transmitting data, still shows numbers. The screen is faded and difficult to read, powered perhaps by residual solar charge or battery remnants. The numbers appear to be temperature readings, though without context it is impossible to know what they represent or when they were recorded. But there are meteorologists, those who worked with rains, those who reviewed the data, those who read the archived reports, who sometimes check the weather forecasts for the Gallatin Range. They look at predicted temperatures for Electric Peak 12 hours ahead, and they wonder if somewhere on that mountain, in a weatherproof box that no one monitors anymore, an instrument is still recording the future, still measuring what has not yet happened, still transmitting data into silence, marking time in a sequence that runs 12 hours ahead of the present for reasons no one could explain and no one wanted to keep investigating. They wonder what that station would show now if anyone were listening, what temperature it would report for a time that has not yet arrived, and whether on that isolated peak where lightning writes its name into stone, the line between measurement and prediction ever truly existed at all.